Code of Conduct Suggestion Guide for Surviving, Comprehending, and Fully Dismantling Systematic Racism/White Supremacy. For the Descendants of the Freedmen/DOFs, written by the Stormy Poet. Page 2. Introduction. Page 4. What does a white supremacist look like? Page 7. How does white supremacy affect non-white and DOF people? Page 17. Navigating a Racist Society, How Black People Can Protect Themselves in Wartime. Page 22. Eradicating the System of Racism/White Supremacy and Reforming Society, Code of Conduct. Page 28. When Communicating. Page 29. Dating and Relationships. Page 29. Controlling Emotions. Page 30. Don't attempt to convert racists nor try to inspire white people to pick up the fight against white supremacy. Page 31. Educating Ourselves. Page 32. Handling Money. Page 35. Watching and listening to entertainment. Page 36. Engaging in politics. Page 38. How to conduct yourself in public/protecting yourself. Page 40. Health and Wellness. Page 42. The Importance of Reading and Writing Daily. Page 44. Weaponizing whatever tools you have at your disposal against white supremacy. Page 45. Self-appointed daily practices of empowerment. Introduction. When I refer to the term white supremacy throughout this document, please note that terms like racism, the system, or systematic racism are all interchangeable with it, and they are synonymous with one another. In addition, due to people often mistakenly dissociating these other terms from what white supremacy really is, I should mention all such following terms are manifestations of this unjust and illogical ideology when they're mentioned in this document. The following are examples of these terms: Confederacy, Confederate flag, the South, the North, Nazis, Nazi Germany or neo-Nazis, racial wealth gap, wealth inequality, American chattel slavery, convict leasing, Jim Crow, segregation, housing discrimination, redlining, economic deprivation, American ghettos, KKK, white identity extremist, Democratic, liberal, Republican, conservative, apartheid, the left, the right, racial profiling, mass incarceration, and white media/propaganda. Merriam-Webster's official definition of white supremacy: a person who believes that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. However, through my extensive study and observation of the nature of white supremacy as a system over the past 5.5 years, I've had the opportunity to collect an overwhelming amount of evidence sufficient for me to suggest an amendment to this definition for the purpose of doing the term adequate justice. White supremacy is an ideology and social system based on skin color and human phenotypes, devised by Europeans upon their colonization of America, late 1600s, early 1700s, and it was created for the purposes of gaining them unmatched control over the world's resources, of being able to freely tyrannize, harm, and control the lives of other groups of people, of forcing labor on other groups to produce comforts for themselves, and to glorify and cement their genetic legacy. When racism is looked at through this honest lens, we can then begin to understand that white supremacy can't be relegated to a simple depiction of just hate and ignorance. When we observe racism from the perspective of why it stubbornly continues to persist as a codified system and why it was created to begin with, we can then begin to understand how those who maintain this system do things that don't appear to make sense to black people. We chalk many of their decisions up to them being blinded by hate or to them being big dumb racists who are simply incompetent. And make no mistake, many of them are those things. However, the majority of what white supremacists think, say, and do is geared toward maintaining and reinforcing the system, and they're fully cognizant and intentional in their actions. To give an example, Donald Trump, probably the most well-known, documented, modern-day white supremacist, refused to approve the funding needed for government workers' salaries in 2019 because Congress would not approve funding for a border wall between the United States and Mexico. The reasoning behind why he and his administration wanted the wall built was that it would help make America safer by stopping undocumented immigrants of a criminal nature from pouring into the country illegally. Consequently, the operations of many government agencies American society is heavily dependent on to maintain public safety. The TSA, FBI, FAA, EPA, etc., were jeopardized. This, in turn, made the country far less safe than before the shutdown, when, supposedly, making the country safer was the initial goal. Keeping the aforementioned definition of white supremacy I provided in mind, we can then begin to examine the logic behind this seemingly illogical action taken by the white supremacists as an example of the kind of practices they engage in. Ones that seemingly make no sense to black people, but that makes perfect sense to them when it comes to maintaining the system. Interpretation, whether it's keeping statues of Confederate generals in front of courthouses and at parks or stealing the credit from the accomplishments of other groups and making it their own in the history books. The white supremacists love to enshrine and immortalize their genetic legacy. Donald Trump inherently understands this to be important to his constituents, aka the average blue-collar racist, and that a wall has nothing to do with border control. The wall is supposed to serve as a symbolic monument to white supremacy, as an enormous physical tribute they can commune around to revere and engage in fellowship in the ideology the monument represents, aka glorifying their genetic legacy. When Congress chose not to grant him the funding needed to build the wall, in retaliation, he shut the government down. The supposed reason for needing to build a wall was to make America safer by keeping out potentially dangerous foreign criminals and preventing drugs from crossing the border into our communities. In actuality, shutting down the government disrupted the effectiveness of government agencies like the FAA, FBI, EPA, and TSA. These are government agencies responsible for keeping the public safe, and Donald Trump refused to approve their budgets. White supremacists believe in getting their way even at the detriment of society as a whole or even other white people. With this action, he demonstrated, just as his constituents wanted him to, that he is willing to jeopardize the safety of the country to promote white supremacy. To those who practice the religion of racism, if they can't impose their will, they've appointed themselves as authority figures who have the divine right to punish others, even if those whom they're punishing had nothing to do with preventing them from doing anything. To the average black person, he made the country even more unsafe. To the white supremacists, though, he made it very clear that if white supremacy can't be maintained and enforced as the law of the land, he was willing to take down the entire country as punishment. Based on the definition of racism I've presented, when you understand what and why the white supremacists do what they do, the very people who have power over every aspect of black life, everything happening in the world around will drastically begin to make more sense to you. If you do not understand white supremacy through the lens of that definition, in terms of how it operates, how it is maintained, and the effects it's had on the entire planet, nothing about your life will make any sense. White supremacy, as a system, is way bigger than a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden. They're just mere players in this political arm of this satanic game, one that is a cancer to the entire planet. Chapter 1. What does a white supremacist look like? When we hear the term white supremacy, imagery of rebel flags, white Klan robes, and Hitler salutes come to mind, and these things are most certainly manifestations of it. However, it is crucial to our very survival that we don't relegate who is and isn't a racist simply by what kind of racist apparel or paraphernalia they are or aren't displaying. Neither should we make that assessment based on whether they use a racial slur or not. For example, the N-word is, clearly, a white supremacist slur. There's no question about that. Blatant displays of racism, such as calling someone the N-word or committing a hate crime, are typically what most people have no problem identifying and openly condemning as racist. These displays of racism are easy to call out and don't cost anyone anything of real consequence to do so. Even the very people who, themselves, practice anti-black racism have no problem calling out that kind of obvious bigotry. Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, has even denounced the usage of the N-word, but he's made a career being a staunch advocate for anti-black racism. However, where people tend to have trouble recognizing and calling out racism, in both their ability to identify it and in their willingness to openly condemn it, is when it comes to the component of racism that is the most significant. The element of racism that gives it its true power to dominate black people all over the world. whether it's members in news media, Hollywood, the educational system, or society as a collective, there's never, in the history of this country, been a genuine and consistent condemnation of anti-black racism as a system. Furthermore, there's also never been a genuine and consistent effort of any significance made in the aforementioned societal arenas to correct the generational harm that this system has and continues to inflict on those classified as black, nor has there been a genuine and consistent effort made to eradicate and abolish it. Please allow me to put this concept into perspective. A white person calling a black person the N-word will have very little effect on the quality of that black person's life, other than maybe hurting their feelings temporarily. However, let's say there is a politician who has never been caught saying the N-word. But then, that same politician introduces a bill, which could potentially become law, that disproportionately targets black people. Now keep in mind, it could be that this politician has never actually said a racist thing to or about black people. And the bill itself could contain no verbiage referencing anything about race at all. Yet, that same bill could still be crafted in such a manner that it works towards the detriment of black people, to the degradation of their quality of life, without it needing to specifically spell that's what it intends to do. A classic case of this was Congress's implementation of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, which provided an unprecedented amount of funding for local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies and prisons across America. This funding was offered to incentivize local, state, and federal agencies to do things like build more prisons, incarcerate more people and with stiffer sentences, many of whom hadn't committed violent offenses, and to hire more law enforcement officers. Being that black people, at the hands of the federal government, have been funneled into urban ghettos, and being that these areas were economically deprived of resources, also at the hands of government forces, this act disproportionately affected those who have descended from American slavery, the freedmen. In any impoverished community, there is going to be a high level of crime due to the fact people are fighting each other for what little resources are available. In that type of economically hostile environment, people's survival instincts kick in, and they become more susceptible to adopting a smash-and-grab mentality. This social dynamic was befittingly illustrated in the book 5 Points by Tyler Anbinder, which would later inspire the movie Gangs of New York by director Martin Scorsese. This book depicts the rampant criminality European immigrants engaged in and the many atrocities they committed against one another in the slums of 19th century New York. The then Congressman Joe Biden, the author of the '94 crime bill, was perfectly aware of the historical injustices done to black society in America, under the watch and at the hands of the federal government, and, rather than providing corrective action to address those disparities and to improve black communities, they enacted a policy that punished black people for fighting and clawing over scarce resources. Therefore, those who had their hand in authoring and voting for this bill are white supremacists. And it is these white supremacists who are the most dangerous kind because they utilize the power of institutions, rather than doing so in direct face-to-face confrontations, to practice their anti-black racism. They fashion and maintain institutions in such a manner as to give the illusion they have nothing to do with race at all. But then they use the powers of organization, resources, and efficiency, which an institution affords them, to attack black life with maximum efficacy. The American socio-political system is supposed to embody ideals like liberty, freedom, men being created equal, and justice for all. And yet, there are those who've used that same institution to enact policies like Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, eminent domain, COINTELPRO, the war on drugs, 3 strikes, etc. The institution of the American educational system is supposed to be about teaching and empowering the youth, about expanding their capacity to think and reason and to prepare them to be productive citizens so they can go chase the quote American dream. Meanwhile, from the chalkboard to the governor's mansion, there are those who've utilized it to do things like hide the crimes of the American forefathers through omitting the fact they were pro-slavery and slave-owning, by portraying them as paragons of freedom and equality. They do so by outright banning the teaching of slavery so that history runs the risk of repeating itself, which is what the only intent of them banning would and could be, and that learning to sing the national anthem is patriotic, and a tribute to those who stood against tyranny and oppression, when as it was Francis Scott Key, the very person who wrote the national anthem himself, who was a slave owner and a slave owner lawyer. These types of institutions should exist for the purposes of benefiting everyone equally. However, when they're weaponized against black people, collectively, the effects are often catastrophic, far-reaching, and chronic. They're infinitely more serious and devastating to any given black man or woman than them simply being called the N-word. These are the white supremacists that need to be focused on, condemned, and severely punished, not just buck-toothed Cletus who has a Confederate flag tattooed on the back of his neck and who sits around smoking meth all day. When jury members don't indict police officers who harm and or murder innocent black men, women, and children, and when a judge sentences those same officers to anything less than life in prison despite clear evidence the crime was intentionally committed. Police who took an oath to protect the public, mind you, then they are practicing white supremacy. Carolyn Bryant, the woman who admitted to lying about 14-year-old Emmett Till making sexual advances at her back in 1955, contributed to the kidnap, torture, and horrifying murder of an innocent child. She, fully knowing what would happen to him if she told that lie to her husband, did so because the white supremacists take great pride and deep pleasure in causing suffering and agony to black people and other non-white people. She knew those who bludgeoned and disfigured him beyond recognition and herself would be protected by the system every step of the way, and that's exactly what happened. This means she, even to her death at the age of 89 in 2023, was and will still forever be a white supremacist. If someone has ever practiced racism, based on our assessment on the nature of how white supremacy operates, there are requirements of action they must commit to in order to no longer be considered a racist. Apologizing or expressing regret for practicing racism are not sufficient actions in regards to proving that an individual is no longer racist. Furthermore, once someone commits an act of racism, either verbally, through their thoughts, or physically, they are forever considered, by the victims of white supremacy, as someone who could potentially commit racist acts in the future, and they are to be treated with suspicion. When there is a system in place that dictates and controls every aspect of the lives of those who are classified as black, it must be considered and reacted to extremely seriously for the fact it literally could mean life and death. For example, a cop who has made racist remarks on their social media, who has been seen socializing with a confirmed racist, or who has been recorded speaking white supremacist rhetoric doesn't possess the moral character to be a policeman or policewoman. They have been granted the authority, by the state, to take your life if they, quote, feel in danger, and there is a system in place to protect them if they wrongly do so. That is what I mean by life and death. Joe Biden, for composing, proposing, and voting for the '94 crime bill, a policy responsible for skyrocketing the unjust and inhumane incarceration of black people, and for his racist remarks regarding integration, is a white supremacist for his actions. Donald J. Trump, for referring to neo-Nazis who murdered a woman during their rally in Charlottesville, Virginia as, quote, very fine people, and for enacting his tax cuts program in 2017, which gutted many of the programs black people rely on to survive, due to the systemic economic deprivation inflicted on us in America, is a white supremacist. George W. Bush, for enjoying and utilizing the wealth, power, and influence generated by the free African labor of the slaves his family owned, is a white supremacist. Tommy Lahren, for mocking and making false allegations against those who protest and challenge systematic racism, is a white supremacist. John Wayne, Robert McNair, Ben Carson, American slavery. Not all racists. Some racists come dressed in suits and ties. Some racists are incredibly articulate and are such excellent debaters they can even convince people there is no such thing as white supremacy and that we, quote, all have a little bit of racism in us. Some racists come in white coats as the very doctors we entrust our lives to. Some look like some hipster who would serve you coffee or craft brews at some locally owned shop or bar in some gentrified part of town. When it comes to recognizing who is and who isn't a racist, the type of clothing they wear and the paraphernalia they possess aren't always the best indicators. Their actions, speech, and thoughts are the only surefire way to tell. And when I say thoughts, obviously we can't read other people's minds. But if you are someone who has even flirted with or considered the possibility you deserve to be in a superior position over black people or that you're genetically superior to black people because you're white, you are guilty of practicing white supremacy. Those who practice it will, most likely, lie and say they're not. The system of white supremacy has endured for as long as it has for the very fact that those who engage in it deny they're racists and that racism even exists. As the old saying goes, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that he did not exist. Therefore, you're, in no way, obligated to debate with someone on whether they are or aren't committing racist acts. Their actions and the result of their actions will speak for themselves, just like how when Mayor Bloomberg refused to end the stop and frisk policy in New York and when he said black people were targeted by police more because they commit more crime than anyone else. Also, you're not obligated to convince someone why they shouldn't be racist anymore. Every person's job, and this is especially true for black people, is to seek out and absorb as much verifiable and factual information as possible and to bring truth to power. It is not the job of black people to engage in pointless and time-wasting emotional back and forths. Doing so is counterproductive. It is up to each individual white person to choose by their own accord to pick up the fight against systemic racism, to not become a white supremacist, and or to stop practicing racism. It's not the job of the inflicted class to convince them to do so, nor is it their job to evoke some type of empathy out of them by guilting them. Nor should we try to convince them how illogical keeping white supremacy in place is. The vast majority of people who directly practice white supremacy or who are beneficiaries of it fully know how unfair and rigged the system is and what kind of damage it is causing to black people and to the planet as a whole. They simply do not care and do not want to give up the social privileges, preferential treatment, comforts, and advantages whiteness affords them. They fully understand how wrong it is, but they also understand necessary evils must exist in order for them to hold their place of complete dominance over groups of people and the majority of the world's resources. Either they know and are willing to tolerate and or maintain the system of white supremacy, or they've been so thoroughly, pathologically conditioned by a lifetime of propaganda, they can no longer be reformed from practicing racist customs, and they will never actively work towards abolishing the system of race. Chapter 2. How does white supremacy affect DOFs and non-white people? Depending on the region, white supremacy affects non-white people differently. Although the basic foundation of the system of race is pro-whiteness, there are and have been different variations of it all throughout the world. For instance, its implementation in Nazi Germany was different than in America. During the Jewish Holocaust, the mistreatment and genocide of the non-white people in Europe was more overt as opposed to the more refined, codified, and covert version of it that exists here in America. Note, even though America went to war with Germany, systematic racism was and still is being practiced in the U.S. It should be strongly emphasized, just because the white supremacists fight amongst each other does not mean they still don't believe in practicing pro-whiteness. The Holocaust lasted for around 12 years. American slavery lasted for almost 2 centuries, and it was followed by a continuous bombardment of anti-black laws and policies that specifically targeted African Americans, generationally, here in America. To get a better understanding of how the group I refer to as the descendants of freedmen have specifically been affected by white supremacy in America, I like to introduce the deep cut analogy. Imagine if someone were to cut you with a knife. It would only take a second to inflict that wound, but it may take weeks to heal. Not only that, the cut would need to be tended to and cared for so it wouldn't get infected and so that it would heal properly. Even if systematic white supremacy were to end tomorrow, the many gruesome and viciously deep cuts that have been inflicted on America's black population would take generations to heal. The unprecedented and incomparable economic, psychological, and physical damage that exists among DOF society is baked into the very fabric of our everyday reality, much like gravity or air. Not only must the system of race be abolished and eradicated, but there would also need to be a redress, tending and caring for the wound, corrective government economic action, and other additional remedial measures provided specifically and only for the black people who came out of American slavery. And that corrective action, more specifically, direct cash payments to DOFs, would have to be sufficient enough to where it puts American black people in a competitive position with white people economically, to compensate for the free African labor that built the wealth in America they benefit from. That would be the only way black people could truly be made whole, because that specific form of redress would correct the specific wrongs and atrocities that were aimed at black people who are the successors of American slaves. Those considered as the red Native Americans, who were also victims of white supremacy, made their specific justice claim based on how they were specifically oppressed by the Europeans. And, whether it was sufficient or not, they received economic compensation and land allocation by the federal government and the successors of the Native Americans, who were indirectly affected by white supremacy, are able to benefit from those provisions. If the Black Haitians wanted to make a justice claim for corrective action to address the generational harm done against them by the white supremacists, they would need to direct that claim to the governments of Britain, Spain, and France, not America. If someone from Nigeria migrated to America, they wouldn't have a justice claim to make in the U.S. Their justice claim, for the purpose of addressing the generational effects of apartheid, would need to be directed towards Britain. Speaking more on how the specific way white supremacy affects DOFs, a more insidious aspect of the system is that it utilizes pitting groups, traditionally considered to be non-white, against Black Americans. The white supremacists who are in positions of power and mass influence have made use of this tactic going back to when the colonial elites used the Irish indentured servants, originally not considered white, against the African ones. Interpretation: the Native Americans, during American chattel slavery, not only operated as slave catchers for white plantation owners, but also as slave owners themselves. And, whenever Black people try to voice the grievances specific to us, we're often met with dismissive responses by white society such as, quote, "The Native Americans suffered, too, so you guys aren't the only ones who had it bad." Or, "Well, we're all on stolen land because they were here first, so Black people aren't innocent either." Someone actually said this to me. Black people in America have historically been barred from obtaining many jobs, and we still face the obstacles of hiring discrimination and of the white buddy systems and social networks. Black people in America have historically fought for equality in the workforce and for equal rights in the area of employment, and there are specific jobs and opportunities owed to us being that we've historically been locked out of them. Those who practice white supremacy know this, but they also understand Black must remain at the bottom of the socio-economic pecking order and must not be allowed to fairly compete with whiteness. So, the white supremacists allowed, the keyword being allowed, Latino populations to pour into the country illegally to fill those jobs that are owed to Black people, even when we've made the larger economic contribution to America, and that we put our money back into the economy. We don't send that money back to some homeland we migrated from because this is our homeland. In doing this, they undercut Black people and keep the white power structure in place. This is how they use Latino groups to carry out their bidding and how they use them as buffer classes to hide their racist intentions. They give white society a justification for Black mistreatment by simply claiming that Black people's lack of employment is because, quote, Black people are just too proud to do the jobs that Latinos are willing to do, so it's their own damn fault their unemployment is so high. These are just a couple of ways the white supremacists use other groups, as long as it suits their interests and as long as it is profitable, to keep DOF people as a permanent bottom class. They will even use other people who are classified as Black against other Black people, i.e. Clarence Thomas, David Clark, Ben Carson, Kamala Harris, and Tim Scott, to name a few. That being said, once they deem a group or an individual as no longer usable or beneficial, the white supremacists destroy their tools, and they do so in a manner in which those same tools may not be used against them in the future. We saw that very process play out at the American-Mexico border, where people were literally being locked in cages and forced to live in inhumane conditions. For decades, the Latino population has been utilized by the white supremacists to take job opportunities away from Black people native to America, and they're sent to majority Black neighborhoods, ones that have already been economically deprived, to create even more competition for the already limited amount of resources in those communities. Black immigrants are allowed into America and are treated very differently by the dominant society than DOF people. They are given access to education, capital, media influence, corporate positions, and political office over Black people who are native to America. Example: the vast majority of Black actors with leading roles in Hollywood are immigrants themselves or the descendants of immigrants. These immigrants are put on display as symbols of success by the white supremacists to make it appear as though the condition of Native African Americans isn't as bad as those who openly speak out against white supremacy say it is. Or, these immigrants of African descent who don't experience the same generational effects of slavery, such as the failure of Reconstruction after the Civil War, have their accomplishments propped up and touted to the society. They do so for the purpose of giving off the illusion that DOF people as a collective just simply aren't working hard enough and that this is the reason their lives are so miserable. They use their success stories to sell the idea to society that, quote, if these immigrants from, pick whatever country, can come from their downtrodden homeland with nothing but the clothes on their back and still achieve a high level of success, then why can't black people here get it together? It sends the message to the society that black people here in America just need to apply themselves more and to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Quote, all this white supremacy/systematic racism stuff must not be the problem. Black people being lazy is the problem, and they need to stop playing the race card. Something I've noticed that prevents many people from correctly identifying a white supremacist is when an individual or a group who has practiced racism quarrels with or even, in some cases, harms other white people. Whether it was the Union and the Confederacy during the Civil War, the United States and Nazi Germany during World War II, Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, the Democrats and the Republicans, or Jared Taylor and Richard Spencer, the white supremacists have always had squabbles, disagreements, and in some cases, major conflicts with other white people. One thing they do not dispute over, however, is whether or not there should be white supremacy. When we see them having these conflicts with one another, we're witnessing them disagreeing on methods of how white supremacy should be carried out, not principle. To them, the objective is and always has been white dominance over the entire planet, nature included. The melanated people of the world, particularly DOFs, must not allow any internal conflicts the white supremacists have among themselves to deceive them into believing the goal of racists is anything other than maintaining global white dominance. And the foundation holding the white power structure in place is anti-blackness. In fact, we should take any conflicts they have amongst each other as a serious threat to us. I say this because, if they're willing to sabotage and even kill each other, people of the same skin color, this shows their unwavering commitment to keeping the system intact. What this translates to is, they hold the ideology so dear to their hearts that they are willing to even oppose other white people if they feel their methods are what are best for the system overall. For example, if a mom and dad had two different parenting styles, both parents want what's best for the child and for them to have the greatest chance of succeeding in life. They may have spats with one another about how to raise their child, but both of their goals are to properly care for them. When it comes to the white supremacists, the same concept applies. Additionally, another reason we as black people should go on alert when they clash is for the simple fact, if they are willing to inflict harm on each other, what are they willing to do when it comes to us? It's been said that if you were to stack up all the bodies of those who died during the Civil War, they would reach to the moon, 620,000 lives. Over 500,000 men gave up their lives in the name of who is going to get control of the Negroes. It is quite crucial that black people have a full comprehension of exactly what white supremacy is and who is practicing it. For it is our very survival that depends on it. But before we can accomplish that, we first have to understand and accept that white supremacy is maintained through a group effort. Therefore, dismantling it will take a group effort. And as the death toll of the Civil War indicates, we must take seriously how unwaveringly dedicated those who practice it are to maintaining it. Every non-white person on the face of the planet, either directly or indirectly, has been negatively impacted by the system of white supremacy to various capacities. If you've experienced hiring discrimination, the system has negatively impacted you. If your ancestors had their land stolen from them or colonized, you are a victim of the system. If you, as a black person, speak differently around white people than you do your black friends, as to appear less threatening or to not cause them to have a guilty conscience, you're experiencing the negative effects of systematic racism. If you've ever been racially profiled by law enforcement, if you've been on trial as a black person and a majority white jury has been assigned to your case, if you're a black person whose hair has fallen out because you've chemically altered it for the purposes of straightening it, if you or a family member has received an imprisonment sentence that was grossly disproportionate to the crime committed, if you prefer the company of white people and actively avoid interpersonal relationships with black people, if you've been in a gang or if you have lost someone to gang violence, or if you're generally nicer and more polite to white people than you are to black people, much to your detriment, You have been negatively influenced by the system of white supremacy, and it has significantly degraded your quality of life. I often hear individuals, mainly those who identify as liberal or Democrat, proclaim that white supremacy isn't the biggest issue black people face. They claim that the biggest issue we need to deal with is a class issue and that the racial wealth gap that exists in black society was caused by capitalism and corrupt corporate giants. The problem with this logic is that most of those megacorporations who practice capitalism are predominantly owned and governed by white and not black people. And they were able to finance the growth of those corporations through the generational wealth their predecessors had unfair access to and were able to pass down to them. Begin here. The system of white supremacy gives those who are classified as white something far more valuable than money or class status. That something is white privilege. Here is a stark example of what I mean by this. The poorest white woman could accuse the richest black man of rape with no physical evidence and could completely ruin his reputation, financially destroy him, and or get his freedom taken away overnight. This very scenario played out when Bill Cosby, once seen as an iconic, accomplished, and commendable TV figure in the eyes of the public, was accused by dozens of white women of drugging and raping them with no physical evidence. And, consequently, a man who was once worth millions and who was nationally revered as an icon of morality and principles, by white folks I might add, almost ended up spending the rest of his life in prison. After serving 3 years in prison, he was released when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court concluded that Cosby's prosecution should never have occurred due to a deal he cut with former Montgomery County prosecutor Bruce Castor, who agreed not to criminally prosecute Cosby if he gave a deposition in a civil case brought against him by Andrea Constand. During that deposition, Cosby supposedly made incriminating statements that Castor's successor, Kevin R. Steele, used to charge Cosby in 2015. It was from that deposition where we get the infamous Quaalude statement from Cosby, which the white media viciously spun into a false confirmation that Cosby admitted to raping Ms. Constand and other women. Quaaludes were a prescription drug that people in Hollywood circles would use as a party drug, and it would be regularly used by someone to mellow themselves out after a cocaine high. The drug would also cause the user, in some cases, to become sexually aroused, much like the effect that the drug Molly has and is used for today. Basically, Quaaludes were used as a party drug back in the 70s. In the deposition, Cosby did admit to buying the drug so he could have sex with women. What the white media never harped on and highlighted was that the women willfully and knowingly took the drugs and that some of the women kept coming back to see Cosby even after he, allegedly, violated them. Cosby never admitted to having sex with anyone against their own will, and none of the accusers presented any evidence, other than hearsay, to back up their claim. The white media, like they always do when a black man is accused of anything, gave the Cosby trial wall-to-wall coverage, and they demonized and vilified him endlessly. The job of the media, both local and national news, who has billions of dollars behind it, is supposed to accurately, factually, and competently report constructive and useful information to the public. Their job shouldn't be to push narratives and to promote biases. Rather than presenting the actual details about this case to the public so they could come to their own conclusions like I just did for you all, me, just some random, teeny-weeny citizen with an inkling of the financial backing of these corporate networks, they painted him guilty before proven innocent. That's because the job of both the right and left-wing media is to make black men the face of rape and sexual predation, when it is the European men who have raped entire nations and the earth itself over the span of thousands of years. When it comes to these white actors, producers, and media execs like Charlie Sheen, Roman Polanski, Les Moonves, Woody Allen, and Kevin Spacey, whose accusers just both ended up, conveniently, dead by the way, they never get the Bill Cosby treatment by the white media. The white media hasn't run 24/7 smear campaigns against these white men like they did with Cosby. It hasn't made it a point to title the headlines in a manner that influences the viewer's opinions before they even have a chance to read the article or watch the news segment. My bet is that most of you, with the exception of Charlie Sheen, have no idea who those other white guys I named are, but I bet all of you know who Cosby is and what he's been accused of. And that's not by accident, it's by design. As a matter of fact, the founder of the hashtag #MeToo movement, Tarana Burke, a black woman, proclaimed on Twitter that it was not her job to go after white men when it comes to sexual predation. It is her very mindset that the white media seeks to cultivate among not only just white society but black women, too. The white supremacist females have often played a divide and conquer tactic among black men and women by convincing black women to subscribe to feminism. In actuality, the white supremacist females' goal is to gain an equal economic footing with their white male counterparts under the guise of, quote, fighting against rape culture, fighting for reproductive rights, fighting to end patriarchy, or fighting to end misogynistic norms in society. If the white feminists were genuinely interested in fighting for all these things, they would have dealt with the white supremacy issue hundreds of years ago. It is the white supremacist male who has and has always had the power and agency to control how the entire society will be conducted. This includes having control over their white female counterparts. In order to continue the survival of the white race and to ensure there will be the next generation of white people to maintain white supremacy, the white male understands he must control the economy and the reproductive habits of the white female. If you can control the economy of the females in your society, aka what we typically know as, quote, the gender pay gap, you, as a white male, maintain dominance over the resources. This creates a social dynamic where white, or those considered as white, males become the most desirous males, even though they might be the least liked by the women. The simple fact is, if females want access to a certain level of resources, white males are the gatekeepers to them. This, as is the intended goal of white males as a collective, overwhelmingly keeps white people, or Latinos, Asians, Arabs who could pass for white, in relationships with other white people. Despite the celebrity interracial couples that get propped up as symbols of, quote, progress in the name of race relations, and despite the number of people we see engaging in interracial relationships, the overwhelming majority of white women prefer and seek white males and intentionally avoid non-white males when it comes to who they really want to have long-term and genuinely connective relationships with, whether they're consciously or unconsciously making that selection. The issue of, quote, sexism in our society cannot effectively be dealt with without eradicating white privilege, and the majority of those who subscribe to white feminism do not want to give up the very privilege their fathers, brothers, sons, uncles, and they, themselves, benefit from. The white feminists utilize black women for their own agenda, and they piggyback off the strides African Americans, both men and women, have made for justice and equality here in America. They equate to, quote, white women wanting more of the economic pie white men have struggled with the, quote, black people being designated as a permanent underclass struggle. The white feminist female's intention is to gain a bigger chunk that white privilege affords their male counterparts, and they exploit black women for the purpose of pushing their agenda, not because they give a rat's ass about the well-being of black women. The historical journalist Ida B. Wells exposed this fact during the suffrage movement. Historic feminist figures, such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton, and modern-day ones, like Amy Schumer and Hillary Clinton, have only used black women for the purposes of championing their own cause. And, being that the feminist movement was constructed to promote the best interest of white women, it, by default, serves as an anti-black movement. When black men, at least on paper, received the right to vote and white women did not in 1870, the prominent suffrage leaders during that period were opposed to it. Suffragists, feminists, like Frances E. Willard, were outraged that black men received the right to vote over them. She was the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, a suffrage organization that allowed black women to join and appeared to champion racial equality, much like the modern-day feminist groups do. Yet, the president of this organization began appealing to the white supremacist females for support when black men got the right to vote. Better whiskey and more of it is the rallying cry of great, dark-faced mobs, is what Willard told the New York Voice in 1890. Notice, she did not make a distinction between black men and women. This organization, one that was supposed to be accepting of black women, revealed what their true intentions were, and it was not to genuinely befriend black society nor champion for the end of systematic white supremacy. And that still isn't the goal of the modern-day feminists. I'm not saying that white women haven't been mistreated because of their gender. That, however, in no way, has anything to do with black men, and black men have no power to practice sexism over black on any non-black women. I'm not saying homosexuals and transgenders aren't sometimes mistreated for their lifestyle choices. I'm not saying that children being separated from their parents and locked in cages at the border isn't a crime against humanity. What I am saying, though, is those who practice white supremacy at any capacity are at the root of all these social issues. And, until the victims of these social issues are willing to wage war against them and their agenda, these social issues will continue to persist. One of the reasons this system has been able to last as long as it has is because those who practice it are the masters of distraction. They believe in keeping black people, as well as the rest of society, distracted 24/7 so that they focus on any and everything but the mechanisms causing black people's oppression. And organizations like Free the Nipple, LGBTQIA, LULAC, etc., who don't even deal with the racism amongst their own ranks, have consistently kept black people focused on every group's issues other than their own. Even the Congressional Black Caucus, members of Congress who are supposed to advocate for the tangibles that are in the best interests of black people on the national level, have spoken up for gays and illegal aliens more than black people during their whole tenure as a political group. They do nothing that benefits black people as a collective and never have. Also, the NAACP, another organization that is supposed to work in the best interests of black people, has made no measurable progress in black society for the entirety of its existence. The system has succeeded in conditioning black people to not value ourselves and those who look like us. So, in too many cases, black people place greater importance in advocating for other groups in regards to their specific issues over our own. Or, black people who are afraid to deal with white supremacy head-on either pretend it doesn't exist and ignore it or devote themselves to causes that have nothing to do with them to distract themselves from it. Black people's self-image has been made thoroughly mutilated and warped. We're subliminally told and taught this daily through entertainment, news outlets, and personal encounters. Because white women and men predominantly play characters in the movies we watch, and because white women, many of who are solely famous for their looks and for being socialites, Paris Hilton and Kim Kardashian, are propped up as the top standard of beauty, black women begin emulating their likeness. This is why so many black women, from a very young age, drench their hair and scalp in various toxic chemicals, and why they end up burning and killing their hair follicles to unkink and straighten their hair in an attempt to imitate the appearance of European women's hair. Black people's hair is labeled coarse, a word with a negative connotation, and it's seen as unsightly and menacing by the dominant society. If a black man or woman has let their hair grow out, afro, dreadlocks, etc., their hair is associated with militancy and hostility. An example of this would be when Andrew Johnson, a black varsity wrestler, was forced to have his hair cut by a referee before being permitted to participate in a wrestling match. He was publicly humiliated for simply having long black hair and was forced to cut his hair in front of hundreds of spectators. Another example of this is when Brittany Nobles, an award-winning journalist formerly employed at WJTV of Jackson, Mississippi, was fired for having, quote, unprofessional hair, even though she was simply wearing her hair how it naturally grew, without being provided a definition of what was defined as, quote, professional or not. You can do a quick Google search of the phrase punished for black hair, and you'll see a slew of different stories where black people are being penalized and criminalized for, simply, wearing their hair how it naturally grows. Black men have internalized society's racist undertones directed at black hair, and, not in all cases, but most, cut their hair religiously, every week in some cases, to avoid making white people think that they are some type of radical, that are militant, or that they are about black empowerment. Subconsciously, black people understand what white society associates with afros and dreadlocks. And either because black men are avoiding the potential consequences that come with having long black hair and or because they've been conditioned to seek out white acceptance and to go out of their way to make white people as comfortable as possible when around them, black men abstain from growing their hair out. Black men will even put chemicals and caps on and constantly brush their hair to lay it down as flat as possible, even though black people's hair is naturally designed to grow out into kinks. What I've spelled out in the section of this document is but a mere inkling of the sheer magnitude of the brokenness and systematic failure that has been baked into black life. No matter what arena of society you're looking at, black people can be found at the bottom of everyone else. When it comes to the arena of the workforce, black people are the most unemployed group and the least likely to own their own business. When it comes to the justice system, black people are the most incarcerated group in the world. When it comes to education, schools in predominantly black communities receive the least funding, just like the rest of the neighborhood that particular school is in. Consequently, dropout rates at both the grade school and collegiate level are the highest among black people. White supremacy, which made it possible for white people to oversee and control corporations like BP and Exxon, is responsible for polluting the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we consume. When you look at who has the least generational wealth, the typical black family has only about 1/10 of the wealth of the average white family. White supremacy is responsible for the kind of environment where the ego of white males becomes so grotesquely inflated that it literally becomes unappeasable. Therefore, since society has told white men they're owed the sun, the moon, and the stars simply for being born with the right skin color, the minute they have to fairly compete for anything in life is a situation where they perceive themselves as victims. Furthermore, since the society tells white males they're the supreme rulers of this earth in the history books, in the movies, and by their peers, they feel they have the right to carry out judgment on the society for not upholding their white privilege. This is why white males have no problem running into a school, a Walmart, or a church and murdering scores of men, women, and children with military-grade firearms. White privilege is responsible for this type of climate in America where mass murder occurs on almost a weekly basis. White supremacy, via redlining, has isolated black people from the rest of the society. This is why the majority of white people have no non-white friends. The system of white supremacy has completely and thoroughly ruined the self-esteem of black people. We have been conditioned to hate ourselves and each other, which is why we're so quick to condemn each other whenever one of us reaches a level of success and gun each other down in the urban communities across America every day. The system of white supremacy has made black people a permanent bottom caste, a completely dominated and broken people. And, if it is left in place, while it may take a few millennia, it inevitably will lead to the extinction of the melanated people of this planet. Chapter 3, Navigating a Racist Society, How Black People Can Protect Themselves in Wartime. One thing that is absolutely key for black people to understand and accept, which, unfortunately, too many of us intentionally avoid doing so, is that war has been waged against us because of our skin color. It doesn't matter if a black person does something wrong or not. When it comes to how the white supremacists see black people, simply being born with melanated skin is a crime by default. Too often, black people try to evoke empathy and compassion from the white supremacists by attempting to pacify them whenever we're being mistreated or harmed by them. We do things like performing public displays of forgiveness, by downplaying the racial elements in situations where we're being treated unfairly, and by trying to explain to the white supremacists how wrong and illogical racism is. Black people do these things because they, on a subconscious level, are attempting to avoid accepting the gravity of the existential threat they're up against. Too many black people don't want to admit this to themselves because accepting that we're oppressed and that there is a system in place designed to attack us in every area of life means we'd, naturally, feel a conscionable obligation to actually put in the work it will take to eradicate it. And, to put it bluntly, most black people are either too lazy or too scared, which it is okay to admit to yourself if you are, to bother themselves with doing so. We, as a people, have to accept the very real danger we are in, though. The white supremacists who have infiltrated law enforcement target, attack, and murder men, women, and children. When they do so, they're protected by police unions, district attorneys, judges, and jurors alike. Also, the media runs interference for cops who harm and murder black people by doing things like demonizing the black victim rather than, extensively, covering the record of the officer themselves. The white-owned media also overwhelmingly highlights and exaggerates black criminality while simultaneously burying and minimizing white criminality. An example of this style of reporting is how mainstream media covered the Cosby sexual assault court case. His trial was given wall-to-wall coverage in the news cycle. CNN did a whole documentary, The Case Against Cosby, which gave his accusers a platform, many of them who were found to have been implausible, to speak their side of the story without giving Cosby a chance to defend himself. And, on a side note, notice how the title of the documentary is, quote, The Case Against Cosby, and not just something like, quote, The Cosby Case or Cosby Accusers Speak Out. CNN presents itself as an unbiased and strictly objective news outlet and as a station that does not report in the same irresponsible manner Fox News does. However, they aired this program with the purposeful intent of shaping the public's perception of Cosby before any type of verdict was ever reached. The New York Magazine devoted a whole edition to all of Cosby's accusers, even the ones who, again, were found to be implausible. And, from 2015 to 2018, the media had a constant spotlight on Bill Cosby's every move. I present this information about Cosby not to champion his innocence. However, when it comes to how the media portrays black people, and, in particular, black males, we see a complete contrast when it comes to their white male and female counterparts. Allison Mack has not been given the same treatment Cosby has by the white media. Many of you who read this don't even know who this woman, nor the many women she has abused, is, and that's by design for you not to know. The feminists and the #MeToo crowd aren't condemning and aren't showing up to her trials in topless protest like they did for Cosby. The world has already pretty much forgotten about all of Harvey Weinstein's crimes against women because he wasn't put in the spotlight for as long and as intensely as Cosby, even though there is, indeed, physical evidence of what he did. There were no documentaries being put out about the actor Kevin Spacey, even though he's had 3 people come forward accusing him of sexual assault. He hasn't received the same media coverage and focus R. Kelly and Michael Jackson have. On top of that, the 3 accusers just happened to die randomly after they came out with their accusations. But, I digress. There's been no further news coverage nor was there any punishment for the actor Stephen Collins, even though he admitted to child molestation, and the public is perfectly fine with that. That is by design. When Congresswoman Katie Hill of California had nude photos of her leaked, her white supremacist, Nazi tattoo was exposed. Rather than the media cross-examining the ideology of someone who holds office and who has the political power to affect the lives of the black citizens in her district, they focused on the #MeToo's condemnation of revenge porn and on the people who are defending the attacks against her character. Billionaire Jeffrey Epstein had a whole island dedicated to pedophilia, and there was no mass public outrage because the media did very little reporting on it. He had multiple cases of pedophilia he was tried for, and, yet, most people had never heard of him even though he is a billionaire. It's by design that the general population doesn't know. The media used Cosby as a proxy for all black men for the purpose of reinforcing the big and scary, rapey black man racist stereotype, one that has persisted since the inception of white supremacy itself. It's the same stereotype that the white women who were a part of the suffrage movement were spreading about black men when they got the right to vote. The media uses stereotypes such as these to vilify, demonize, and dehumanize black people to condition the public that the mistreatment and death of black people are justified, that they are justified because we're not, quote, really human beings. The goal is to tell the society what they are to think about black people, and what society is to think about black people is they aren't actually people, but rather, caricatures, but mere animals whose lives don't have much meaning. This teaches the public to be apathetic and indifferent to the oppression and genocide of their fellow black citizens. For example, in the case of Cosby, here was the underlying message white media was pushing, quote, "Do you see this evil, rapey, and disgusting black man? All of them are like that. They can't be trusted, and if they ever got the chance to rape you or your daughter, they'd do so in a heartbeat. All of them are out of control, and someone needs to teach them a lesson and put them in their place. They get the society to internalize messages like this by beating us over the head with them every single day, so that the next time a police officer or a citizen murders a black male, you will come to the conclusion, quote, he probably did something to deserve it. They've successfully warped the consciousness of the masses into believing black people are suffering and dying at the hands of the white supremacists because they, in one way or the other, deserve it, that it's justified, no matter how horrific or gruesome it is. Simultaneously, as was the case with the domestic terrorist Mark Anthony Condit, who mailed bombs to the citizens of Austin, Texas, and who killed 2 people and injured another 5, the media and law enforcement paint the character of white criminals as innocent and blameless. Their reputation doesn't get dragged through the mud like a black person's does when they commit a crime, but, rather, they are spoken about in a way as to make the general public empathize and relate to them. For example, the Austin Police Department did a press conference where the interim police chief spoke about the manifesto this terrorist wrote before carrying out these crimes, one they never released, which white media outlets across the country made sure not to highlight. He made sure to tell the press that, upon the police department's review of his manifesto, that this murderous animal who blew up non-white citizens was not in any way associated with terrorism, even when the city was in a complete state of terror, and that his manifesto was the, quote, outcry of a very challenged young man talking about challenges in his personal life that led him to this point. They didn't reveal anything about how he learned how to make explosives. They didn't reveal what his ideological beliefs were. They never released the manifesto. The media never pressured the cops to release any of this information, which the public has a right to know about. These types of practices are typical when a white person commits a crime. The media and law, quote, it's not because they made the conscious decision to commit vile acts of wickedness, it's because they had perfectly rational reasons for their behavior. This type of social engineering makes for a very dangerous environment in our society, especially for black people, because when someone does something against the law, they're supposed to be accordingly punished for it. For example, if you kill someone intentionally or attempt to do so not in self-defense, you deserve to go to jail for the rest of your life, and your reputation, legally and socially, should forever be associated with murder. Punishment for those who break the law is supposed to serve as a deterrent to other citizens to not commit the same criminal behavior. And yet, as is the case with white males, when they consistently see their fellow white male peers being painted in a good light in the media, when they see law enforcement gently handling them and going out of their way to not harm them, and when they see district attorneys, judges, and jurors helping them get off after they commit some of the most horrific and bloodthirsty crimes to date, not only does it not deter the next male who identifies as white from doing similar crimes, it empowers and emboldens those who are thinking about doing similar crimes to go through with carrying them out. To the black family out there, and even to the white people for that matter, we need to understand these are the type of individuals we share the society with, and that they can attack at any moment and at any time. This is the constant danger we're in. Anytime black people interact with police officers, they're potentially in danger. Black people need to assume the officer may shoot them or their family members at any point in time, and that there will be an entire apparatus in place to protect the officer from being punished if they choose to do so. Black people are in danger economically. The wealth white people in this country have acquired through unjust and unfair means has compounded generationally to an astronomical level, and black people collectively have been so economically deprived that there's the potential for a situation in which the majority of black society will not be able to afford the basic necessities to live life. Due to workplace discrimination under the system of white supremacy, black people are in danger of not being able to make money to support their families nor themselves. Law enforcement and judicial bodies all over the country have been incentivized to funnel black people into the prison industrial complex. In these modern-day concentration camps, black people are exposed to extremely inhumane conditions and are forced to perform hard and cheap labor. Black people are in danger of being targeted and framed and taken away from their families to be incarcerated at any moment. Black people have been conditioned to despise one another. Therefore, due to internalized racism, black people denigrate and sabotage the success of other black people. The collective consciousness of black people is one where we project our own self-hatred onto one another, and where we go out of our way to make it to where other black people are not successful in anything. Many immigrant groups who have come to America, being that they already have anti-black sentiments in their home countries, have aligned themselves with the dominant society's ideology. Russia, China, and Britain are just some of the nations where a significant sector of the population harbors anti-black views. And many of them, not all of them, but too many, when they migrate to America, bring their anti-black bigotry with them. Peter Leong, Geronimo Yanez, and George Zimmerman are a few examples of non-white people from different ethnic backgrounds who've committed violent acts of anti-blackness and were not punished for doing so. In addition to the white supremacists themselves, black people have to be aware of all of these other non-white, anti-black bigots. In every arena of our society, politics, religion, economics, the judicial system, the workforce, dating and relationships, the media, and the educational institutions, the white supremacists have waged war against FODs, simply for being born a particular color. This is completely illogical, senseless, barbaric, and demonic system, and, even though those who practice are the most powerful beings of the earth, it is the most cowardly, insecure, and pathetic beings of the earth who practice it. I say, quote, beings because once one adopts and or tolerates such a vile and satanic entity, they become something less than a human being. They become a contagion among civilized and righteous humans, just like a virus or a parasitic worm. To subscribe or to become indifferent to white supremacy is to revoke your very humanity. Chapter 4, Eradicating the System of Racism/White Supremacy and Reforming Society, Code of Conduct. What makes white supremacy such a stubbornly enduring force is that those who practice it are collectively codified. For instance, when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, yes, a racial element did factor into the reason he was able to avoid being punished. However, racism is way deeper than personal interactions. Racism is a power dynamic. If the dominant society did not have power, they wouldn't be able to practice, quote, supremacy, and they wouldn't have the ability to so easily harm us. White supremacy is a group sport. It is not simply relegated to situational, face-to-face, nor interpersonal interactions. When George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin, it was racial murder, of course, but when it was a police system that did not apprehend him initially, a district attorney that did not prosecute him, a predominantly white jury that let him off, and a media apparatus that demonized a 17-year-old murder victim to justify his demise is what racism, true racism, really looks like. A white supremacist school teacher in Indiana, who has the ability to teach young minds that slavery wasn't all that bad, is on the same page, as far as what the ideology is and what it requires, as a white supremacist judge in Tampa Bay, Florida, who has the authority to hand down outrageous sentences to black people for nonviolent crimes. A white supremacist cop in Atlanta, Georgia, who is authorized by the state to end your life, knows what to do when it's time to get on code, just like a white supremacist librarian in Seattle, Washington does, who can choose what history to hide from a black person by not letting them check out certain books. The racist doctor in Austin, Texas, who can choose which treatment to or to not administer to you based on race, is on the same page as the racist mechanic in Italy, Texas, who can choose not to fix a black person's brakes properly. A black person can be arrested in Orlando, Florida, and, from the moment he or she is arrested to the point where he or she is incarcerated, it is possible for them to never encounter a black authoritative figure throughout the entire legal process. There's never a situation where a white person would ever have to experience the equivalent in this country nor in the rest of the world. Again, the reason the system of white supremacy has endured for as long as it has is because those who practice it follow a code. Racism is a religion, and those who worship it all operate out of the same playbook. And what makes this system so powerful is that no one has to spell out what the rules are. I say playbook, but, at the end of the day, there is no official playbook or set of rules. And, yet, everyone perfectly understands what their role are in the system. The white supremacists are the most powerful group in the world, not because they're smarter than everyone else. It is because they follow the same code to a T, one that transcends any of their individual genders, faiths, class statuses, or political preferences. Whenever it comes to protecting police being punished who unconstitutionally kill innocent black men, women, and children, they all get on code. When it comes to hiding the countless crimes they've committed throughout history, they're on code. When it comes to businesses with whom they choose to spend their money with, who they patronize, and how they circulate money in their community, they're on code. Regardless of what societal sphere they're operating in on any given day, white people do not need to be instructed about how they are to conduct themselves because behavior that empowers the system of white supremacy is the cultural norm here in America and most of the world. Like someone eating with a fork instead of chopsticks, or like a nation using the imperial system rather than the metric system, white supremacy is the cultural standard. Similar to how parents pass their genes to their children, the European American colonizers passed down certain behaviors to their heirs, most of whom are their white descendants who occupy America today. Anti-black customs are passed on to preceding generations, much like physical features such as eye and hair color, and there's no need for a how-to manual on how to practice them. And that's what makes this system so deadly efficient and effective, even if it is one that is evil. Step-by-step instructions don't need to be distributed to every white man, woman, and child on how they can maintain the system, for the system itself is part of the very cultural fabric of America, just like football, oversized vehicles, apple pie, or reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. For instance, no one has to tell white women or men they're not supposed to date or procreate with black men and women. There's no need for that because gentrification, a systemically racist operation meant to displace black people, artificially separates the white and black populations so that there's very little chance of white and black men and women ever interacting with each other to begin with. Ergo, no one has to come out and say black and white people shouldn't procreate or that white people shouldn't allow the niggers to pollute the white race. Gentrification is often just seen as a naturally occurring social phenomenon, whereas places that were once considered the blackest, most crime-ridden, and most dilapidated areas in the city just magically morphed into the whitest, most crime-free, and highest developed ones. Cruelly enough, it's these same areas that were once food deserts, where their former black citizens had very little access to fresh fruits and vegetables that always seemed to boast a Whole Foods, a Trader Joe's, or a Publix. Anti-black sentiment is the majority accepted norm in America, and it is not only white people who work to promote it. Just like what occurred during the Jewish Holocaust, there were a number of Jewish co-conspirators and collaborators who aided the Nazis. When it comes to the white supremacists, they, too, have non-white sympathizers who aid them in their efforts and agendas. These accomplices do so either because of self-hatred, because they so desperately covet white acceptance, because they think aligning themselves with white supremacy will keep them safe from being harmed by it, or because they're flat out too cowardly to challenge it. Codification, in and of itself, is what has given the white, quote, race its strength, not them being more innovative nor ingenious than black people. Anti-black racism is the religion the white supremacists have sworn their undying allegiance to, and their codification is sturdily ironclad, so much so, they're willing to accept the plethora of the horrible side effects that come along with receiving white privilege, mass shootings, climate change, sexism, etc. So, now that I've spelled out the many threats black people face living under this system, the question then becomes, what are FODs to do about effectively neutralizing this imminent danger? Becoming thoroughly knowledgeable in history is something very important for black people to get in the habit of because of the various lessons we can extract from it. One of history's most profound lessons is the power in codification. Throughout history, codification among various groups at various points in time has proven to be monumentally effective at accomplishing groundbreaking achievements. It was through codification that the Haitians were able to overthrow their oppressors and to successfully defeat the most powerful militaries in the world in 1804. Not only that, afterwards, they were able to assist other nations around the world in overthrowing their own oppressors. It was through codification the Viet Cong were able to successfully battle with the juggernaut that is the American military for almost 20 years and why they, in the end, forced the United States to concede defeat. It is through codification, evil as it is, that white supremacists own the majority of the wealth and resources in South Africa when they, in fact, are the minority there. We can even look at the example of Jesus and his 12 disciples. They were just a group of 13 people and their impact on the world is still resonating thousands of years later because they were codified. It's not really large numbers of people who make a significant change in the world. It is a concentrated core of individuals who are on code with one another who have had the biggest impacts on different societies throughout history. As it pertains to black people, specifically here in America, if we're going to eradicate the most serious and dangerous issue we face and the biggest crime in human history, what code do we have in place to challenge this system? And, if we don't, why not? I submit to anyone reading this, I believe we haven't effectively formulated one because we're being prevented from doing so via the countless distractions and lies hurled into our midst on a daily basis. And, I also submit to you all, they're preventing us from having one because the potentiality of a day we actually adopt one scares the living hell out of the powers that be more than anything else. They know an FOD's code, a code specifically for how black people are to conduct themselves on a daily basis in a way that undermines the system, spells the end of white supremacy. I want white supremacy to fall permanently. I despise this wicked device of non-justice more than anything. My heart aches at what those who practice this demonic and feculent behavior have done to the melanated people of this earth, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of them receiving unearned advantages, privileges, and resources while melanated people suffer all over the world. I'm tired of them raping the environment and decimating the habitats of the world for their own personal gain. I'm tired of seeing my white brothers and sisters, at least they were supposed to be under the eyes of the Maker, ignoring and being completely indifferent to the legalized slaughter of their black brothers and sisters, and of them pretending and lying to themselves that they don't see it occurring, of them simply going about their day as if everything is normal. I'm tired of watching my people being destroyed spiritually, mentally, and physically, generation after generation. When we take into account the evidence history has laid out for us, based on logic and reason, it is my belief that a code of conduct is the best and only chance black people have of eradicating this barbaric, wicked, and absolutely satanic regime of injustice. Code of conduct suggestion. Often, many of the conversations people have about what is to be done about solving the racism issue focuses on a singular, one-and-done solution rather than multiple methods that need to be enacted in different arenas in both the society and our everyday lives. For instance, a company can claim to be working against job discrimination by making a pledge to and by hiring more black people. However, what good does that accomplish if the supervisor they've hired that black person to work under has racial biases, and when he or she still can make that particular work environment very hostile and uncomfortable for the black employees? So, talking about how diverse we need to make an organization is not only a fruitless discussion, but it is one that only focuses on one area of human activity, without addressing the mechanisms upon which this system is able to operate, nor how or where job-place discrimination originated in the first place. After all, you can't solve an issue unless you're well educated on the root cause of that problem. Some people say black people just need to get more college degrees and that us becoming more educated will improve our collective condition. The problem with that logic, though, is that black people are disproportionately poor and cannot afford to attend college in many cases. And, even when a black person does get a degree, as was the aforementioned sentiment, they have to try to find a job in a workforce that is extremely discriminatory. You'll often hear black people proclaiming the need to vote Democrat because the Republicans are a bunch of racists or that they're, quote, the greater of two evils. For the most part, black people as a collective have consistently voted Democrat down the ballot, and what do we as a whole have to show for it? Unfortunately, there are no one-size-fits-all solutions to systematic racism. Therefore, that is why in each area of human activity upon which we engage and every personal and social situation we interact in, as many of our daily practices as possible must be weaponized and used in opposition to the system. One might view that statement as hyperbolic. However, to that I ask, what are we doing in our everyday lives that isn't being used to maintain the system already? Everyone in America, even if it's indirectly, is already working towards bolstering the system in some way or another. For instance, I buy groceries at Walmart. Therefore, I'm already putting money into a white-owned, multi-billion-dollar company that uses absolutely none of their money to help the black population, when they single-handedly could improve the lives of the millions of struggling black people who patronize and/or work for them. The same example could be applied to Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. These are the companies we as black people empower with our economy, who are owned by white people who don't do anything to improve the condition of black society. If you bank with Wells Fargo, you're supporting white supremacy for the simple fact Wells Fargo got its start profiting off of American slavery. If you get your insurance through your employer and that provider happens to be Aetna Insurance, it, too, got its start out of slavery. Anytime you buy tickets to go see a Disney movie, or if you watch any programming owned by the Fox network, founders of both media companies, Walt Disney and Rupert Murdoch, were and are racist. You're supporting both companies with your continued viewership. My point is, by us just living under a system of white supremacy means we are already promoting it by default. It's impossible to not do so at some point. However, what we can do is minimize doing as many of those actions as humanly possible and engage in behaviors and customs which work towards undermining the system. Things the average black person can do on a daily basis without needing a bunch of money and influence. And, if a concentrated core of people consistently practiced specific speech, thought, and physical actions every single day of their lives that works toward lessening the effectiveness of the system, then, and only then, will we see this beast begin to weaken. Toppling white supremacy will not be an overnight job, and the work required to do so is not for the faint of heart. Nevertheless, if a dedicated few of us are unwaveringly consistent and faithfully practice a code of conduct, and if we make it a point to denounce those who are practicing off-code behavior, we will set the tone for our loved ones, peers, and offspring. Hopefully, our behavior will inspire them to join the fight and to continue the necessary work, not only for dismantling this system of injustice, but also for building one based on justness and impartiality. To whomever you are reading this, before you review the code of conduct I've composed, please allow me to preface. My intention in creating this code is not for it to serve as the ultimate authority as to what the victims of white supremacy should do to combat it. It is simply a guide presenting what I feel are the most effective methods as to how to best avoid certain dangers and how to protect ourselves from insidious threats while living in this hostile climate. These are practical acts we can perform on a daily basis that work towards the best interests of Black people. If there is a suggestion I've made that you disagree with, it's not one you have to adopt. We as Black people are allowed to disagree on things, and I encourage everyone to think for themselves. The only thing we can't afford to disagree on is who our real enemy is. While certainly any and everyone is welcome to review this code and to accept or reject it, because, as is indicated in the title, white supremacy targets all non-white people, I geared it towards DOFs. And the reason I did so is because this specific group of Black Americans faces specific issues under white supremacy. Therefore, those specific issues require specific solutions, and to achieve those, there is a unique set of guidelines I believe we will need to internalize to best handle our situation. I based this code of conduct around what I thought were the primary occurrences and interactions we typically engage in on a daily basis. This way, no matter what situation someone finds themselves in at any given moment, they can refer to the code of conduct and know exactly how to handle that circumstance correctly as a Black person, in a manner that both works in the group's best interests and also in a way that empowers that individual. Some of the statements I make about Black people may sound mean or harsh, but I'm obligated to do what is in the best interests of my people. The fact of the matter is that war has been waged against us, and we don't have time to mince words. I'm in the business of bringing concise and truthful information even when it hurts feelings. It is better for me to hurt feelings here and now so that the people can have a full understanding of what unconstructive behavior they might be involving themselves in and the danger that them doing so puts them in. I would rather do so now so they have a chance to correct those practices rather than something potentially fatal occurring to them for engaging in off-code behavior. Number 1. When communicating, only communicate when it is absolutely necessary, and I'm referring to all forms of communication, phone, social media, in person, etc. One thing that hurts Black society the most is that Black people communicate far too often, in general, and excessively about useless and trivial topics. This overabundance of communication drowns out the information that could potentially be of our benefit, and that's precisely what the white supremacists want. Get in the habit of communicating for the sole purpose of conveying beneficial, useful, and valuable information. The more you're communicating non-constructive information and the more you focus your attention on the non-relevant conversations of others, the more you're not allowing the opportunity for information that could benefit or quite literally save your life to reach you. Never speak solely for the purpose of just getting attention, and avoid trivial and non-intellectual conversations as much as humanly possible. Overcommunication can be deadly, to you as an individual and to Black people as a group. Also, refrain from using profanity when communicating. Using cuss words to describe people, places, or things instead of selecting more accurately descriptive words trains your mind to be lazy. Therefore, you'll become less effective at articulating what it is you're attempting to convey, which creates confusion, one thing we absolutely need a lot less of in Black society. Number 2. Dating and relationships. Note: please make sure to read this particular rule all the way to the end. If you're a Black person who is romantically entertaining anyone who is not actively working towards ending white supremacy 6 days a week, 1 day being needed for rest and rejuvenation, the person you are involved with does not genuinely love you. If you are a Black person who thinks you are friends with anyone who is not actively working towards ending white supremacy 6 days a week, they're not truly your friend. No one can claim to be in love with you nor to be your friend if they aren't doing all that they can to battle and eliminate the single greatest threat to your existence. When it comes to measuring the loyalty of a person, both in romance and friendship, the efforts an individual has made towards ending white supremacy serve as a litmus test as to whether or not that loyalty is genuine. This can be difficult for many people to hear because relationships, romance, sex, and love are very powerful forces. No one wants to make their significant other uncomfortable with such a heavy topic, and I'm definitely not saying to break up with nor divorce someone if they don't or haven't been going hard body in the paint against white supremacy like I'm doing in this document. Please don't read this, and then immediately go break up with who you're with or end a years-long friendship just because your partner or friend hasn't been railing against white supremacy like how I've been doing throughout this report. However, there eventually does need to be a sit-down and an in-depth discussion about what the plan will be moving forward. When it comes to who you plan on spending the rest of your life with or who you choose to regularly keep in close proximity, you and they need to be on the same page in terms of what needs to be done to safely navigate an environment that is very hostile to those classified as black. Those who you are close to need to have a complete and thorough understanding of the true reality and conditions you have to contend with daily, how they can specifically be of constructive help to you in that reality, and a game plan as to how they can work together with you in fundamentally changing the society so that reality is something you and the people who look like you no longer have to contend with. After all, if you have children with your partner, your black offspring are going to have to contend with a world that judges them based on skin color. If you and your partner aren't on the same page, ideologically, when it comes to contending with white supremacy, will you be able to properly prepare your children for this world they will have to, inevitably, contend with? 3. Controlling emotions. As black people, rather than making choices that have long-term consequences based on logic, reason, and basic common sense, the dominant society has succeeded in grooming us, as a cumulative group, to denounce and despise critical thinking and information that will improve the quality of our lives, and to navigate through life making decisions based primarily on our feelings and impulses. When we see another black person who is doing financially better than us, we become slanderous and envious of them rather than seeking out the lessons for how they achieved their success so that we may utilize them for our personal gain. That is acting based on emotions. Anytime a black person is killed by the police, rather than becoming politically organized and rather than aggregating our resources to financially back politicians who will punish racist cops and who will work in the best interests of black people, we get sad and outraged. Then, we forget it ever happened in a few days. That is acting based on emotions. Get in the habit of seeking solutions for issues rather than simply reacting to problems emotionally. Though one should be disgusted, shocked, and outraged whenever the white supremacists inflict harm upon us, one should stop being so surprised. It is very childish and cowardly for one to pretend we live in a post-racial society just because black people aren't physically walking around in chains or strung up in trees everywhere. It takes bravery and honor to accept the reality that war has been waged against black people by the white supremacists. I say that because when you accept you're in a socio-economic war with the most powerful group of people on earth, you'll naturally come to the conclusion that you then have to actually do something about it. And, in a war, expect your enemies to constantly barrage you with a variety of attacks. They will never let up on trying to harm us. The last 300 years have been proof of that. They can't afford to let up because the very barometer they use to gauge how intact and effective the state of white privilege is, and of itself, is based on the degree of how intensely black people are suffering. The enemy is not going to show you mercy, nor are they going to suddenly find religion and give up the privileges of being white. White supremacy wouldn't have been able to endure as long as it has, had the collective white masses not been indifferent to its existence. In a war, you are to keep your emotions in check. It's okay to feel a righteous outrage whenever you or a member of the DOF group is racially attacked. However, it is not okay to be outraged while simultaneously not working towards taking down the entity responsible for causing our oppression. Be outraged, but do not stay immersed in your anger. Black people, far too often, think that expressing emotions like anger or sadness in response to white supremacy equals actions or works against it. While it is okay to feel emotions like righteous anger when we see white supremacy acting itself out, those emotions should be utilized to inspire action. They should not serve as just a reaction. Number 4. Don't attempt to convert racists nor try to inspire white people to pick up the fight against white supremacy. As a black person living under white supremacy, your time and energy are precious and finite commodities. The whole society has been rigged against you, and you will need every bit of time and energy you can get to survive in this kind of environment. A common counterproductive action black people partake in is arguing with white supremacists about why they should stop being racist and trying to get white people to understand how bad systematic racism is and why they should join us in the fight against it. Partaking in this action is the equivalent of a soldier on the battlefield in the middle of a firefight attempting to debate with the enemy about why they shouldn't be firing bullets at them. We live in the digital age. Information can be very easily accessed. There are a plethora of books, movies, and documentaries presenting the evidence about how poisonous white privilege/white supremacy is to the integrity of our society. There is a universe of documentation spelling out how wicked and barbaric systematic racism is, which can be readily accessed with the mere click of a button. One could argue, mathematically speaking, it would be next to impossible for a white person to have not come across information that debunks the notion of white superiority and that depicts how this system is a detriment to the entire planet as a whole. They understand perfectly well that what they're doing is pure evil. They understand that fact and have made their peace with it. As white supremacist Richard Spencer said, quote, "It is better to win than it is to be morally right." To commit to such evil in the first place means they've already snuffed out any semblance of a conscience they may have had. You debating with them about how wrong they already know they are is not going to make them find religion. There are no incentives the majority of white people can conceive of as to why they should give up white privilege, so stop expecting them to genuinely champion against it. While there are white people out there who have taken up the fight against white supremacy, they are far and few in between, and they are people who have chosen to do so on their own because they see white supremacy as morally corrupt. No one had to convince them to do it by arguing with them. They did so on their own accord, which is what white people should collectively do. Reserve your time and energy for engaging in constructive and fruitful activities that empower you and that empower the black collective. If a white person asks questions about what should be done to fix racism, refer them to literature, preferably, or films that specifically speak out against white supremacy, or to my current document you're reading now if you'd like. You, as a victim of white supremacy, are not obligated to educate white people on racism. If they genuinely desire to see white supremacy end, they will willingly take on the challenge to educate themselves about it, and they will use the very white privilege white supremacy affords them to work against it and to undermine it. Number 5. Educating ourselves. For far too long, too many black people have been willing to learn something new only if it is either being presented by white people or has been verified by them, when in fact it is the white supremacists who have disseminated the most misinformation to black people over the span of centuries. Being that it is not always clear who is and who isn't a white supremacist, we must be very cautious when those who have been classified as white present any information to us, and this includes those in academia. Don't rely on the dominant society to educate you on the things that will empower you. Put in the work to investigate and to search for information on your own, and educate yourself. Don't relegate what you educate yourself on to trivial matters like gossip, sports, rap, or which material objects to consume next. Instead, cultivate a ravenous hunger for knowledge on a variety of topics, and use any knowledge you're able to gather for the sake of empowering yourself and other melanated people. Allow yourself to become passionate about something, and try to learn everything there is to know about it. If you are talented in some way, become a student of that gift, master it, and try to find a way to make a profit off it without having to work for someone else. And find a way to utilize it against white supremacy. As a black person, your objective is to, at all times, strive to be the smartest person in any room, even when you're amongst those with degrees. Degrees represent how educated a person is, not how intelligent they are. What good is a degree to a black person when they have little to no knowledge of how to navigate this society in the midst of the superabundance of pitfalls, booby traps, and tripwires white supremacy has in place for them? If you're able to take something away from your experiences in grade school or higher education that has empowered you, by all means, you should utilize it. However, the primary function of those institutions is not to empower black people, even HBCUs, but rather to disempower. Don't allow white institutions to define what the standard of intelligence should and shouldn't be. Instead, you set your own standards of what intelligence should look like, ones that supersede theirs and ones you and other black people define. Number 6. Handling money. DOF people as a whole have been ruthlessly barred from economically competing on an equal playing field with white people since America's inception. Towards the late 16th century, the Europeans designated black people to be the labor class responsible for generating the wealth of colonial America, and, after well over a century of forced labor, slavery accomplished just that. Now that the toil afforded by the African slaves has been used to amass and solidify their wealth, and now that they've hoarded it and used it as capital to generate even more wealth intergenerationally, they've been on a non-stop crusade for over a century to eliminate the descendants of that obsolete labor class for the fact they no longer have any use for us. America is the richest country in the world, and now that this nation has achieved this global status, the dominant society has erected white supremacist institutions designed to wipe black people out through a slow, yet steady, and effective genocide. The primary method they utilize to accomplish this is economic deprivation. They've never allowed black people to effectively pass down wealth generationally, and that has made us vulnerable to their mistreatment. On top of that, throughout history, the white supremacists have been, and still are, unwaveringly vigilant and watchful of black people's economic condition. Black people being economically successful and self-sufficient, without the help of white people, spells the end of white privilege and the end of their iron grip on the world's resources. In their eyes, we must be eternally economically deprived and crippled. There are no enclaves of wealthy black people in America nor the rest of the world, and, if there were, the white supremacists would use whatever weapons they have at their disposal to attack it and destroy it, just like they've done so many times throughout history. That being the case, as a collective, what little resources we actually can obtain are to be held sacred. Every penny a DOF person earns and spends should be economically weaponized against the white power structure. I understand black people, as a group, do not have a lot of money, but it's not so much about the amount of money we have as much as it's about knowing how to best utilize what little resources we are in possession of. For instance, if a grassroots black media outlet, one not backed by corporate sponsors, is providing high-quality journalism in the best interests of black people and it had 1 million people give them $5 a month in support, imagine how much that media apparatus would be able to flourish in just 30 calendar days. That outlet wouldn't have the pressure of worrying about offending white corporate sponsors. So, they'd be able to speak honestly about the issues black people face without having to fear consequences because they reported on something that didn't align with the network's views. And it wasn't that 5 people needed to give $1 million each to put that media platform in a position of strength. It was just every person needing to give a mere $5, the average cost of a cup of coffee, to accomplish that. I don't remember who quoted this, but I heard it a while back, and it's always stuck with me. Quote, "It's not about a few doing a whole lot, it's about the many doing what they're able." This is a philosophy black people must tattoo on their hearts and brains. We'd get so much more done as a people if we adopted and incorporated such a simple concept into our day-to-day repertoire. The same goes for any grassroots organization promoting the best interests of black people. For example, if you are passionate about playing music and there's an organization giving cheap music lessons to black people in the community, you could shoot them $5 a month or more in support. If there is an organization promoting a passion for literature among black society, writing and reading are extremely important to black liberation, put a few dollars a month behind them. My point is, it's not about everyone giving a lot of money to individuals or organizations. It's more about a critical mass of a few individuals consistently giving what they are able to towards causes that work in our best interests. This type of economic activity is what other ethnic groups engage in on a regular basis. Additionally, other groups provide preferential treatment or, in some cases, exclusive patronage to businesses owned by members in their group. For instance, exclusivity when choosing which businesses and services to give money to is the predominant way in which Jewish and Asian enclaves conduct themselves economically in their own communities. As a black person, you cannot go into a Jewish enclave like Rockdale, California, or an Asian community like Chinatown and start up a business for the simple fact they only patronize their own and they will not support you. However, Latino, Middle Eastern, Asian, and even white-owned businesses set up shop in predominantly black neighborhoods, which are all impoverished, and black people will gladly give what little they have to patronize them. Black people will even take the time to travel to other cities, outside their neighborhood, to do so on behalf of non-black businesses. The white supremacists have done everything to keep grassroots organizations and black-owned businesses from thriving, and one of the ways they've done that is by making it hard to find their location. Luckily, there is technology available to help combat that. Being we're in the economic position we are, it is important that, whenever possible, we intentionally and deliberately seek out black people in our surrounding area to practice business with. It will have to be a deliberate act because many black-owned businesses simply don't have the resources to advertise the way white businesses are able to. One of the main pushbacks black people might have to that idea is the instilled belief of inferiority about one another. So, we automatically assume the services and products of other black people are going to be inferior. That, and some black people just flat out prefer the company of white people and would much rather shop around them, another manifestation of self-hate. This is one of the many lies black people must stop believing about themselves and each other. The majority of the inventions that have dramatically improved the quality of life for all of this planet's inhabitants, from medicine to machinery to architecture to technology, were created by FODs or were inspired by the creations of Africans. If a black-owned business does provide subpar service or products, that is not a black customer's cue to react in a manner and to say things like this, "You see, I knew I was going to get a crappy product messing with your black business." Black people want you to do business with them, but they're not trying to give you good service. They're just out here trying to hustle the community and to make a dollar for themselves. I say that because, most of the time, black people don't chew out white business owners whenever they receive unacceptable service from them, but have all the smoke in the world when a black one does. Whether you're a black business owner or not, you should always strive for excellence and to provide your clientele with services and products that are comparable to the ones white businesses provide, and, in actuality, you should seek to provide better than them. You definitely should expect your black customers to hold you to the same standards they expect from the white-owned businesses they frequent. That said, if you've received what you feel is subpar service from a black business, that is not your signal to slander them or to destroy their reputation. Because, at the end of the day, starting and operating any business is exceedingly difficult, but it's 30 times more difficult if you're black. If you've never tried to start your own business, the kind of sacrifice and dedication it takes to build one, and one that is actually successful, is, most likely, a foreign concept to you. All you know is that you had a bad experience with the end product, which could have just been the result of someone having an off day somewhere in the production process. Taking this into account, recognize this is your chance to provide your brother or your sister with constructive criticism. It is your civic duty as the customer of a black business to point areas in which their business can improve. And you should freely provide this feedback and only in the spirit of what is best for their business. Additionally, you should make it very clear this is your intention. Most black businesses would love to improve, but they can't do so without constructive feedback from their customers. If possible, provide this feedback behind closed doors, through email, or through a business directory. Never reprimand a black business owner in public or in front of their customers. Your goal should be to see them thrive, not to discourage them from learning and growing. Make it a point to share information about black-owned businesses with as many of your family and peers as possible regularly, in person and on social media. White people do this all of the time. We really don't have a choice but to do business with white people because we live under the system of white supremacy. However, we can do our very best to take a look at where we spend our money, and we can search to see if there are any black options who can provide those same services we get from white people. Number 7. Watching and listening to entertainment. For the majority of black people, entertainment in our eyes is just that. Entertainment. However, nothing that white-owned media presents to us is ever, quote, just entertainment. To some degree or another, all entertainment that is presented to us is done so for the purposes of mind shaping. From the movies and television shows we watch, to the music we listen to, all of it, to some extent or another, is geared towards the purpose of subtly normalizing, maintaining, and promoting the pro-white/anti-black standards that have already been programmed into the collective subconscious of the masses from the time since we were children. To paraphrase the elegant words of the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, when we turn on our televisions, we are tuning in to receive our daily dose of propaganda. The white supremacists understand, as was the case with the propaganda campaign the Nazis ran during the Holocaust, if you repeat a lie long enough and consistently enough, people will begin to believe it. Even if a person is intelligent and educated enough to know that what is being presented to them is false, they will eventually believe a lie if it is fed to them constantly. During the 1930s and 1940s, that is how the Nazis succeeded in getting the general German public to be indifferent about the murder of 6 million Jews. The Nazis presented anti-Jewish propaganda dressed up as entertainment because they understood when people are being entertained, they let their mental defenses down. People's skepticism of something isn't as scrutinous, and their critical thinking skills have been turned off when they are being amused. When it comes to all forms of entertainment, black people need to understand all of it is being used to shape society's perception of black people and to shape black people's perception of themselves. And, no matter how educated or enlightened you are, the more you watch and listen to the programming white-owned media is presenting to you, the more you will start to adopt pro-white/anti-black notions. It is impossible not to internalize lies when they are repeated to us on a daily basis. Eventually, you will succumb to the white supremacists' ways of thinking and acting. There is nothing wrong with taking in entertainment, responsibly, that is. However, knowing there are messages that are embedded in the entertainment we ingest, we should minimize the time we spend seeking to be entertained. Set aside a minimal time every week for entertainment, and never go over that self-allotted limit. The vast majority of your time should be spent discovering what your purposes in life and talents are, managing your finances, educating yourself on how your enemy moves, using whatever assets you have to end white supremacy, reinforcing relationships with loved ones, and rejuvenation of oneself. Entertainment is something that is supposed to be earned based on the amount of energy and effort you put into the aforementioned time areas. It is important to have one day of complete rest where you perform no strenuous tasks, whether physical or mental, and it is important to take vacations. However, these need to be scheduled, and seeking entertainment outside of these designated rest periods is an undisciplined act, and it signifies that you are a person who is not truly committed to ending systematic white supremacy. The amount of entertainment you engage in is something that is to be strictly regulated and highly policed. For the purposes of avoiding the propaganda the dominant society is trying to crowbar into your subconscious, and for the purpose of avoiding time-wasting endeavors, staring at your phone and mindlessly scrolling through social media, that do not produce fruitful results for you as an individual nor for the black collective. Number 8. Engaging in politics. Voting is, strictly, a business affair. In exchange for your vote, you are supposed to get tangible and measurable benefits in return. In any business deal, you are never supposed to give up something without receiving some type of reciprocal benefit for doing so. Unfortunately, most black people have been convinced that they are supposed to vote simply for the sake of voting and that they are not actually supposed to get anything out of the process. No other groups vote along this same line of thinking, nor do the politicians come among them saying that they cannot specifically do things that only benefit their group, and no other groups would tolerate them doing so. The LGBT community demands and gets things specifically for them, and so does the Jewish community. When it comes to issues like immigration, the Latino population demands specific things from their politicians, and, in some cases, illegal immigrants are granted more rights than legal black citizens. Black people are the only group that believe we are to vote for the purposes of helping everyone else and not ourselves. We're also told we should choose from the lesser of two evils when it comes to politicians on the ballot. If we are to call ourselves civilized and upstanding people, there is no conscious way we can choose between any evils. We, as the sons and daughters of the survivors of American slavery, have been targeted and vigorously oppressed by the government agencies on the local, state, and federal level since chattel slavery's inception. These white supremacist practices are what led to the urban ghettos black people predominantly occupy. It is the local governments who are responsible for economically depriving these areas to the point where they've deteriorated to a third world level, and it is they who are responsible for aiding and abetting racist cops who unconstitutionally killed black people. Not only should a politician come directly to you when asking for your vote, well versed in the specific needs you and your people have as a black collective, they are to seek your approval toward implementing solutions that your group have jointly decided upon to rectify the injustices done against them. Politicians are, exclusively, in office to represent the issues and to do the bidding of the black constitute who elected them. They are to come before the group, bend the knee, and pledge to do the work that reflects your group's best interests. They do this with every other group, and black people deserve to be treated the exact same way. For instance, don't vote for any presidential candidates who have not promised to champion reparations for black people. We are the sons and daughters of those who survived American slavery, and we have never been allowed to establish an economic foothold in order to generationally pass down wealth amongst our bloodlines. Our ancestors, exclusively, generated the wealth this country enjoys, for both white people and non-white groups, and America would not have the global influence it does had that wealth not been generated at the expense of the blood, sweat, and tears of African people. There are multiple corporations and white family fortunes that were spurred out of American slavery, which should be accredited to black people, not the, quote, hard work and innovativeness of white people. The wealth that black people generated needs to be redistributed to bloodline successors of those who lived their life in bondage. The torturous work they put in to generate that wealth means that it is something that, rightfully, should be distributed to their heirs, the same way how any white father or mother would want to pass down what they worked for to their children and their children's children. Therefore, if a presidential candidate is not advocating for reparations in the form of direct cash payments, they do not deserve your vote. Politicians are not to be liked, nor are they elected to be our friends. They are elected to produce tangible results that benefit you as a black person. Voting should be a completely emotionless and a very businesslike transaction. If your city council members are not going to work to economically develop the black side of town for the purpose of correcting the specific historical injustices that have been implemented against it, then they do not deserve your vote. If your state governor is not willing to pardon black people on death row who have had substantial evidence in their case omitted by a judge, which could potentially spell their innocence, they should not be voted for. If your state representative, your senator, or presidential candidate is not advocating for reparations for black people in the form of financial compensation, because lack of financial resources is the biggest current threat to our overall existence as black people, you are not to vote for them under any circumstances. Demand that your politicians do so, and financially back the politicians who do have black people's best interests in mind. Number 9. How to conduct yourself in public / protecting yourself. As a black person, I need to repeat it over and over again that a war has been waged against you. You are on a battlefield, 24/7. You live in a society that has utter contempt and hostility towards you and that wants to see you and the people who resemble your likeness completely annihilated. That being said, you have a God-given right to protect your loved ones, your own life, and your property. Despite what many false prophet preachers have told black people over the years, nowhere in Scripture does it say that you are supposed to accept whatever mistreatment is dealt to you. In fact, Scripture challenges you to stand up and speak out against the forces of evil. When it comes to black men, the ones who are supposed to be the defenders and protectors of the community, the white supremacists have demonized their masculinity because they understand it is a threat to the white power structure. To the black men, defend your family, your life, and your property with everything that you have in you if it is threatened by any opposing force. It is your inherent duty to protect your household and your community and to be leaders on the front lines when it comes to combating anything that poses an existential threat to your people. Value your manhood and take pride in it. If you are pulled over by a police officer, based on the history of being able to murder us with impunity, expect that police officer to be hostile toward you. Expect him to make up the excuse that he thought you had a weapon on you, and prepare for him to fire on you at any moment for any reason. This doesn't mean you are to drive around in fear. This just means you need to be prepared so that you are not caught off guard. This does not mean you are to be rude or hostile towards a police officer. In fact, it is better to be emotionless and expressionless with them. I know that a police cruiser could drive by me while I'm walking on the sidewalk and mistake me talking on my cell phone as a weapon, and I know they could hop out and open fire on me. It will be my word against his, if I survive it, against theirs in court. Out of the race soldier and I, who do you think would prevail in a situation like that? This is the kind of climate black people live in, and black people need to accept that. Therefore, stay legal by doing things like keeping your tags current and obeying traffic laws. Do not give law enforcement any excuse to interact with you on any level. Also, do not contact 911 for an emergency unless it is completely dire. Limit your interactions with the police as much as humanly possible. If a police officer determines he is going to open fire on you when you've done nothing wrong, you have every constitutional right to defend and protect yourself by all means necessary. If they begin shooting at you first and you've done nothing wrong, then you also have a God-given and constitutional right to shoot back at them and to protect yourself or anyone else you care about. If they happen to shoot you, defend yourself to the very end. They have no right to kill you in cold blood, and you send a message to them that whenever they attack black people with no justification, there will be deadly consequences. You are not safe as a black person in America. At any moment you may be attacked simply because you were minding your business. When you go to places like a health food store, expect smug and condescending looks from white people. They consider places like Whole Foods and Sprouts white spaces where they're not supposed to have to look at nor be in the presence of non-white people, unless they're employees, due to black people not typically being able to afford the kind of food there. The looks I get when I go to Sprouts are meaner than any black person has given me in the hood. If I am in this kind of space, I know that at any moment they could be calling the cops on me to claim I stole something just because I'm black and because I'm in a place they think only white people should have access to. As a black person, it's best to limit your time in public in general. I don't say this because I'm suggesting that you should be cowardly and never come outside. However, in order to survive, I am making this suggestion. From mass shooters to racist cops, to those who make Barbecue Becky-esque false calls to police, to random white supremacist attacks like the one Dylan Roof carried out, society is extremely hostile to black people. As a black person, do not dwell in any public place any longer than you need to be there. Be extremely swift in handling any business you have in public, and return home as soon as possible. If you are patronizing a non-black business, do not seek to be friends with the associates, the supervisors, nor the owners. You are there strictly to do business, nothing more and nothing less. When interacting with white people, understand how society should operate has been presented to them in a very different way than it has been to black people in this country for over a century. They're interacting with you based on those subtly anti-black messages that have been implanted in their subconscious. Therefore, you must be aware what you're dealing with when encountering any white person in public. This is not to say you should be paranoid of all white people, nor that you should be rude or disrespectful to them. In fact, I encourage all black people to strive to be the most polite and courteous people in the room at all times. Doing so destroys the white supremacists' justification for dehumanizing us, and they hate it when we completely go against their stereotypes. This is just to say you should be cautious when doing so. Are all white people white supremacists? Of course not. However, when you live under a system that socially and economically uplifts a group of people based on skin color, just like Dr. Kaba Khomeini articulated, black people have to be extremely vigilant whenever we interact with any white person. Unfortunately, black people need to be well-versed when it comes to both firearms and hand-to-hand combat. Expect violent aggression by the white supremacists in response to us simply minding our business. It is in the white supremacists' nature to attack non-white people unprovoked. The best we can do is solidify our economy as a group so they cannot attack us financially, and for us to personally build up our arsenal so we have the artillery means of protecting ourselves should the white supremacists try to come and physically harm us. When interacting in society, always know the stakes against you and never forget them. Number 10. Health and wellness. Because black people have been conditioned to not value themselves as full and complete human beings, by default, too often we don't see the importance of investing time, energy, and money into maintaining our health. In addition, furthermore, black people experience trauma on a regular basis under white supremacy, and this has taken its toll mentally and emotionally. Because black people don't see themselves as fully human nor as inherently good people, conditions like mental and behavioral disorders are something black people think they deserve. I understand that black people simply, as a collective, do not have a lot of money to invest in things like high-quality foods or unadulterated water. However, when it comes to maintaining your quality of health, it's not about being perfect in all your actions, it's about doing the best with what you have. For you as a black, doing things like drinking enough water, adding 2 vegetables to every meal, eating at least 1 fruit a day, getting 8 hours of sleep, meditation, and getting at least 30 minutes of vigorous physical activity every day go a long way towards maintaining your physical and mental well-being. Valuing and maintaining your health is, indeed, a revolutionary act against white supremacy. Understand, right here and now, you, as a black person, can ask for help if you are hurting. You are a complete human being, and it's okay to need assistance. It is not cowardly nor weak to reach out to counseling and therapy resources if need be. Don't be afraid to search for and research any and all available options, and do not cease in seeking out the help you need until you find it. Unfortunately, many black people turn to drugs like alcohol and marijuana to ease the pressure and stress they feel while living under white supremacy. In many cases, these people become addicts, which further compounds even more issues on top of the challenges they already face just being black in America. And, rather than devoting their time to dealing with the force causing the stress and the pain, they spend most of their time high or strung out. If you are an addict, you will not be able to stop using drugs on your own. It is impossible, and you will need help from others to quit. There's absolutely nothing, quote, strong and black or manly about trying to fight addiction alone. White people sure as heck do not try to fight it by themselves, and they form support networks to help each other overcome addiction. Black people need to have those same kind of support/accountability networks when it comes to addiction, and we need to begin championing the notion that, quote, real black men and women go to rehab and stay sober. We need to pride ourselves in being a people that constantly vigilant and voraciously coherent. I come from a family of alcoholics on both my mother and father's side, and I've seen, firsthand, the destruction addiction inflicts on black life. And I understand how that addiction was stoked by the circumstances we were born into as a people. Therefore, I want to popularize sobriety and clear-mindedness among black society, the same way white supremacy has succeeded in getting us to popularize addiction and being mentally undisciplined. Find a support group in your community to help you overcome your addiction. If you are an addict, you are completely useless to your fellow black brothers and sisters in this war we have to fight every single day. In a war, you, as a soldier on the battlefield, need to be in peak physical condition and capable of managing your thoughts and emotions in a healthy manner in order to properly combat this machine. Rather than responding to pressure and stress with drugs and/or binge-watching TV or by practicing escapism, utilizing stress management techniques such as exercise, meditation, and having at least one day of no work and of self-reflection are a healthy way to cope with the stress you feel living in these conditions. Drugs like alcohol and marijuana damage the body, negatively alter your emotions, and dull your mental clarity. Drugs limit you from being effective at doing anything to better your own life nor the lives of others. Rather than investing your money on superficial items, instead, invest it in things like organic vegetables, fruits, and meat. Avoid eating meat as much as possible. Remember, working towards maintaining your health on a daily basis is a radical form of resistance against white supremacy. Number 11. The importance of reading and writing daily. As a black person, there are a number of ways reading and writing on a daily basis can be beneficial to you. The act of reading has a different effect on the human brain as opposed to watching something on television or listening to an audiobook or a radio program. Not that these platforms can't present constructive information. Reading expands your imaginative capacity because you are mentally placing yourself in whatever scenario the piece of literature is depicting. This is why the Diary of Anne Frank is so popular and well known around the world. When people read it, they are able to mentally transport themselves through time directly to the attic where she and her family hid for 3 years. People are able to mentally hear the bombs dropping and exploding around them, to feel the hunger, to feel the boredom, to see the soldiers marching outside of the window, and feel the daily fear they experienced. Exercising your imagination in this manner enables you to become more insightful and visionary. If it was shown on television or if it was read to you from an audiobook or a radio program, the imagery and sounds are selected for you to see and hear versus you imagining your own version, and, as is the case with the Diary of Anne Frank, you would hear the person's depiction of her instead of you imagining what she would sound like. Reading also gives you time to stop and reflect versus a movie which is continuously in motion, and you can't appreciate and ponder on each moment to put yourself in certain situations the story is narrating. This builds your level of empathy, your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. When I've read books about how African Americans have been mistreated, tortured, and sometimes even killed, I ask the question, how would I feel watching one of my family members get lynched, or how would I feel if I was on my way to get lynched myself? I stop and reflect, how would I feel if that happened to me? How horrified and disgusted would I be if they were doing such grisly acts of violence to my body? It was illegal for slaves to read for a reason, and, unfortunately, though it's legal now, that zest for literature the white supremacists snuffed out in black people has remained extinguished for far too long and for far too many of us. Therefore, we lack a fundamental degree of empathy for one another. In order to eradicate the system of white supremacy, black people must develop a profound sense of understanding and shared experience with one another due to the fact that we are all victims of this despicable evil that has been unleashed on the world. Literature can go further in depth into the specifics of certain topics rather than cinema or even a documentary can, because programs such as these have length limits to comply with a network's time allotments. Literature not only gives you a more complete understanding of a topic, but you can also highlight or make footnotes in a book to easily refer back to it later. When making a case for any point, black people should have evidence to back it up, not just feelings and emotions. In a book or an article, you can easily reference things rather than trying to get someone to watch a specific part of a program or to listen to a specific part of one. Being able to so easily refer to something in a book also helps with retention. As I said in one of the sections earlier, black people should always desire to be the smartest people in the room. Readable information is more accessible nowadays than it's ever been. There are a plethora of online libraries that will let you rent out books for free on the internet, physical book outlets, such as local black-owned bookstores in your area, and places like half-price books that have extremely affordable literature on a variety of topics, as opposed to movies and audiobooks. We live in dire times under white supremacy where information must be disseminated and absorbed as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We don't need the barriers of costs and technology getting in the way of the type of information that we so desperately need to read to become empowered. Reading on a consistent basis facilitates the enhancement of writing skills, and the more someone writes, the more someone sharpens their ability to communicate verbally. The majority of published books have been reviewed by professional editors. Therefore, the more one reads, the more they are exposed to proper grammar and punctuation. Using correct grammar and punctuation through writing on a regular basis trains the mind to become more disciplined in how one communicates on paper, electronically, and verbally. Subsequently, when you write on a consistent basis, you train your mind to be more efficient and direct when you communicate, and it conditions you to be more considerate of what you are saying and how you are saying it. The more effective we as black people are at conveying information to one another, the better. Black people do not have the luxury of time for having fruitless and confusing conversations among one another. It does no good to have a wealth of knowledge when you are unable to clearly and plainly communicate that knowledge to others so that they can benefit from it. While all the books you read don't have to be educational, even ones you do read for entertainment should be providing material in it, in some way, that will empower you in your efforts of resistance. Books like 50 Shades of Grey aren't one of them. Just saying. Whether it's an article, a book, an essay, a published college paper, memoirs, sci-fi, nonfiction, a letter, a poem, or a short story, for a black person, reading and writing on a daily basis is key when it comes to developing the type of mind you want to have to actually make a difference. Set aside time to read and write, even if it's 15 minutes, every single day for the rest of your life. 12. Number 12. Weaponizing whatever tools you have at your disposal against white supremacy. A lot of black people get discouraged when they don't see other black people picking up the sword of justice and fighting alongside them to topple this evil regime. If you are one of those people, my message to you is this: understand that those individuals discouraging you with their lack of action are still asleep but may wake up at any moment. If they do, they will need your guidance based on all the knowledge you've accumulated from your own battles you've encountered while living in a racist society and from all the time you invested in studying the enemy. At that moment of awakening, they will need you. Regardless of what your skills, talents, or gifts are, find a way to weaponize them against systematic racism, even if it's to create a product or business that earns a profit so you can fund someone else directly opposing white supremacy head-on. If you are a painter, compose images that denounce and expose the suffering this sick system has produced. If you are a writer, like myself, compose literary material that counteracts the false propaganda white-owned media outlets pump out every day. If you are a graphic designer, produce appealing images and graphics for someone with a media program that speaks out against injustice against black people or for any organization working towards dismantling this unjust social power order. If you are a financial advisor, an accountant, or a loan officer, teach free classes to black people on how to become financially literate so they know how to practice economic warfare against their white counterparts. The point I'm trying to make is, whatever skill sets or masteries you possess are things you should be weaponizing against white supremacy on a daily basis. There's absolutely no talent that cannot be weaponized against it, and there are none that can't be used to empower black people as a collective. Self-appointed daily practices of empowerment. Based on these code of conduct suggestions, I decided to compile a list of best practices I will commit to each day that I believe will counteract some of the negative effects white supremacy has had on my own life. These are things that, if we all did them on a daily basis, would deal a severe blow to the integrity of this force that's been unleashed against DOFs here in America. As was the case with the Code of Conduct Suggestion Guide, you are welcome to engage in these daily practices yourself, and, if you're a victim of white supremacy, you, of course, have the right to discard the ones you feel would not work for you. Number 1. My Creator has made me aware of the satanic threat to humanity known as white supremacy, and He has equipped me with the talents and specific skills to combat it. He is the Creator who commands righteousness and justice, and He has commanded me, via the example of the Savior, to use every tool at my disposal to eradicate this demonic force of injustice and unrighteousness, and I am committed to the daily work it will take to do so. 2. I pledge allegiance to serving the successors of American chattel slavery, because we have been specifically targeted here in America, to those who wish to see white supremacy eradicated, and to all the other children of the Creator who have not yet come into this world, but will have to deal with the effects this system has had on it. Number 3. I swear to indulge in self-criticism for the purposes of becoming the most well-rounded and upstanding black person I can be, and I vow to never harm nor deceive those who I've pledged my allegiance to. Number 4. I will not deny and will, instead, embrace the skin color and physical features the Maker has gifted me, and I will cherish and be grateful to Him for these traits. Number 5. I will not accept the social construct of whiteness as a logical ideology, and I, instead, embrace that we are all children of the Maker. Number 6. I will fight bravely for my people in any way that I am capable of, even in the face of danger, protests, slander, and the loss of relationships. Number 7. As a melanated man, I accept my role as provider, builder, leader, and protector in my community, and I support and promote the melanated woman's role as the nurturers, the carriers of life, the caretakers, and the preservers of ideals and memories in the community. I simultaneously denounce any agendas of confusion about gender and sex that white-ran entities attempt to bring into our community. Number 8. If I have children, I will raise them in my household alongside my wife, and, from a very young age, I will prepare them to do psychological, economical, and physical combat against the forces who've committed toward working against their best interests as black people. Number 9. If I ever have children, daily, I will educate them on things the dominant society lies about or hides to counteract the miseducation they attempt to indoctrinate them with. Number 10. In all statements I make and in all conversations I engage in, I will seek to be as truthful and as factually accurate as possible. If I'm wrong about something, I will welcome any additional information that will bring about clarification. I will also hold other Black people to the same standard when they are communicating. Number 11. I will be respectful, kind, and courteous to Black people just as much as I would be to any other ethnicity. Number 12. I will maintain a thirst for knowledge, and I will seek to know as much as humanly possible about the world around me and how it operates. Number 13. I will only engage in romantic relationships and in friendships with individuals who are down with supporting my efforts or who are, themselves, diligently working towards dismantling white supremacy. Number 14. While I have the right to have righteous anger against white supremacy, I will not allow it to make me generally bitter nor resentful. I will remain hopeful and in high spirits, and I will see toppling white supremacy as my duty in life, which provides me with a sense of meaning and purpose. It is a privilege to do the Maker's work. 15. Number 15. I have a God-given right to protect my property, my life, and my loved ones from any and all threats. I will stay well armed, and I will be hypervigilant when I am in public. I will teach my family how to use weapons and hand-to-hand combat so that they can protect themselves when I'm not present. Number 16. I will intentionally seek out Black-owned businesses, and, for every white business I currently patronize, I will search to see if there are any Black-owned options to replace them with. Number 17. I will try my best to avoid purchasing superficial items. I do not need to lessen my involvement in empowering the white economy. Number 18. I will rest my mind, body, and spirit at least one day out of every week. I will do no work. I will meditate. I will not engage in vigorous physical activity. I will not get on the internet. And I will utilize that time to reconnect with family and friends. Number 19. I will be extremely skeptical and scrutinous of any agendas the dominant society presents to Black society. Number 20. I will not make public displays of forgiveness to white supremacists who have openly practiced racism in any form due to the fact that it will only embolden their ilk to further make attempts at harming us. Them seeing there are no consequences for doing so will embolden them to continue harming us. I will, instead, demand the harshest punishment for anyone who commits any act of racism. Number 21. I will not stubbornly hold onto philosophies and ideals that no longer empower myself or my group. Number 22. I refuse to vote for nor financially support politicians who do not produce specific tangibles for Black people that correct the harm done to us by the citizens and by the local, state, and federal government agencies, no matter what their political affiliation is. Number 23. I will invest time, money, and energy into maintaining my health. I will respect my body by feeding it high-quality foods. I will respect my body by getting the recommended hours of sleep it needs. I will respect my body by exercising for at least an hour a day. I will refrain from putting poisons like alcohol, smoke, and hallucinations into my body. Number 24. I will not indulge in escapism even when white supremacy puts tremendous pressures on my life and the lives of my loved ones. I will, instead, seek to eliminate the force causing that pressure. Number 25. If I'm having trouble managing my thoughts and emotions in a healthy manner, I will seek out therapy or counseling resources, even if the ones who will be helping me happen to be white. Number 26. I will always be willing to soak up any information I'm able to, even if it comes from the white supremacists, to empower my group. Number 27. I will not seek to be liked, but, rather, I will seek to be respected. Number 28. I will not discuss racism with those who do not want to talk about it, and I will not discuss racism at my place of employment. Number 29. When interacting with the police, I will be as emotionless as possible. If asked questions, I will provide no unnecessary details. I will not reach for anything even if I'm instructed to without requesting that the officers shine his or her flashlight on the area I'm reaching. I understand I have no constitutional rights under white supremacy and that they could apprehend me for doing absolutely nothing wrong, but I have a God-given right to defend myself in any way I can should they attempt to harm me. I will not protest their demands nor shout at them to give them an excuse to be violent with me or to take my life. Number 30. If at all possible, I will try to avoid calling the police on other black people. To the best of my ability, I will avoid all interactions with police officers in all spaces in our society. Number 31. The traitors within black society who work against our best interests for their own gain or other groups who align themselves with the white supremacists' anti-black sentiments are people I will consider as permanent enemies of the state. The only way for them to no longer be classified as enemy status is that they must wage war against white supremacy. I will be openly hostile against anyone, no matter their color or creed, if they work against the best interests of FODs. Number 32. I will not engage in idle gossip about topics like celebrities, sports, rap beef, or how much money someone is making. I will seek to engage in conversations about history, strategies for improving the quality of life for myself and for my people, and about how we as black people can prevent something like white supremacy from ever happening again in the future. Number 33. When I see black children in public unsupervised, and if they're causing any kind of commotion, I will alert them and let them know that they are in danger, because of the track record white supremacists have of calling the police on black children, which has resulted with them being murdered in many cases. Number 34. Daily, I will continue to study the teachings of Scripture and of my black forefather and foremother prophets, like Ida B. Wells, Dr. John Henrik Clark, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller Jr., and Dr. Yosef Ben Jochanan. I will continue to heed the messages and the warnings they left for our black generations, so that we may be able to properly decode and destroy the enemy before us. Number 35. I will cherish and respect the earth that the Maker gifted to us, to the best of my efforts, by recycling, by not being wasteful, by driving as little as possible, by not littering, and by reusing any and everything I am able to. Number 36. I will not needlessly kill nor harm people, animals, or even insects. The mindset of the white supremacist is to wipe out life simply because it is an inconvenience to them or whenever they deem it as an obstacle in their path of gaining power. I will not adopt their mindset of killing any creature when it is not absolutely necessary, even if it's something as small as a bug. As a black person, I am a civilized human being that values all life, and I live in harmony and in symbiosis with the earth, as my ancestors did. Number 37. I will watch and listen to no more than 30 minutes of television and social media, TikTok, IG, Facebook, etc., a day to avoid the constant slew of propaganda the white supremacists are attempting to indoctrinate me with. Number 38. Rather than aspiring to work for someone else, I will seek to build my own revenue-generating streams to one day position myself where I do not need to work for anyone else and where I can hire and employ other black people. I will never view working for someone else as the highest level of success I am to achieve as a black person. Number 39. I will accept no amount of money offered to me for the purposes of selling out or betraying my people. Number 40. I will not be afraid to make white people upset by openly and plainly speaking the truth about white supremacy. Number 41. I will hold no hatred toward white people, but I will hold righteous anger to the white people who stand idly by and allow white supremacy to occur without standing up against it, the very system they benefit from in some way, whether directly or indirectly. If you as a white person have not waged war against white supremacy, I view you as part of the biggest problem FODs are having in obtaining our justice claim. If you, as a white person, really want to take a stance against racism, you're going to have to attack white privilege straight up the middle. There's no way around it. 42. Number 42. I will not feel inferior as a human being, nor will I feel ashamed black people don't have the level of wealth white society has. I will feel morally superior we don't enjoy the privileges and comforts that were gained by wicked and demonic means. I will do my part to build a rival economy not built on injustice. Number 43. I will have complete and total faith my Maker is guiding me in all the work I need to do to remove this specific form of evil from the face of the planet. I will do my best to have faith in His plan, and I will execute it without complaint, resentment, or hesitation out of my respect for my Creator and for my people. Number 44. I will thoroughly document any and all efforts I've made against white supremacy so that my heirs can see what I was doing on their behalf and so they can have a template on how they can combat the system themselves. In closing, whoever you are out there who took the time to read this, I greatly appreciate you doing so. I pray that this document helped bring clarity to many of the occurrences in your life that didn't make sense to you as a black man, woman, or child. I hope I've made a clear and concise case about how many of the bad things that have happened to you throughout your existence on this planet weren't just chance occurrences or bad luck. Many of them were engineered and were done so because there's a certain sect of the population who is deadly afraid of ever having to compete on your level. I hope I've made a compelling argument to you that those things didn't happen by accident. They didn't happen because you weren't trying hard enough, and that you, indeed, are capable of defeating and destroying what they've engineered against you. And please let me say this, you and me and us, and we will defeat and destroy the artificial barriers they've manufactured against us. Because, from the bus boycotts, to the Seminole Wars, to the Haitian Revolution, to the 2020 uprisings, we've proven time and time again throughout history that, whenever we get on code, no enemy is too powerful for us as Africans. And, if you're a white person who had the chance to read this, take what you've seen here today as a challenge to you, as a challenge to be brave, righteous, and honorable by not engaging in the same old deafening and cowardly indifference the white collective has clung to since white supremacy's inception. This is a challenge for you to have the guts, integrity, and the fortitude to be on the correct side of history by actively working on a daily basis to provide economic justice to the group of people who were the victims of the greatest crime in human history. This is a challenge to you to be a part of real heroic history, not the fake history all races are taught about white people throughout our, quote, education tenure. Be a part of a courageous and upstanding history as being the first person or group of white people who actually weren't afraid to wage war against white privilege/white supremacy and who made concrete victories over it on behalf of FODs. The kind of white history we learned about, like George the slave owner Washington not being able to tell a lie and Abraham the white man maintaining the superior position, Lincoln genuinely wanting to free the slaves wouldn't hold a candle to the history of the white people who actually had the fearlessness to advocate for and work in support of, literally, the most unpopular thing someone can advocate for. But that's what genuine and authentic heroism looks like. It looks like standing up for what is the right thing to do even if you're hated for it. So, dear white people reading this, that is my challenge to you. You have your work cut out for you, so I suggest you get started ASAP. This message is something our people desperately need, and I hope you will spread it far and wide. Throughout this suggestion guide, I made my case for what I thought was the most effective way to abolish systemic racism. My philosophy on how we are to deal with that is definitely not the only one that should be considered. As black people, we have many brilliant minds among us, and I am sure other people have their own ideas as to how to deal with this system as a whole. And that is definitely a good thing. The more ideas in the pot the better, as long as we as black people here in America do not ever disagree on who the common enemy is. Ending systemic white supremacy/race is the ultimate goal, and eradicating it is all that matters, despite any disagreements we may ever have amongst ourselves. Whomever you are reading this, I hope I was able to bring clarification to you as to what is happening in the society we dwell in. In closing, I just want to say it has been an absolute honor and a privilege to present this documentation and these historical verifications to you all, the people. I was grateful to do so, and, as a black man and as a writer, I will forever be the people's servant. My hope is that this document will inspire black people and other non-white groups to become more desirous of a world without this cancer of white supremacy in it. DOFs, out of all the other ethnic groups in the world, are the only group who sees white supremacy for what it is and who actively fight it. Whatever group you are part of, be on the right side of history and stand with the former American slaves against this injustice. Don't just join the countless of the cowardly groups who've always just gone along to get along, the Irish, Italians, Latinos, Asians, etc. Stand above the rest and mirror the example DOFs have had the guts to exemplify. In this document, I've spelled out both why white supremacy exists in the first place and what kind of work will be required to deal with it. That said, I can only deliver the information, I can't make you act on it. At the end of the day, I'm just a messenger. You, whoever you are within the sound of my voice or the sight of my words, are the difference maker. Again, thank you to all who took the time to read this. You truly grace me with your attention. And thank you to my good friend Allison Fowler who took the time to edit this piece. I couldn't have pulled off the legibility of this document without her. Also, my deepest and humblest respects to the scholar warriors I soaked up the knowledge from: Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Ida B. Wells, Dr. Kaba Kamani, Dr. Khalid Mohammed, etc., along with the members of the NBM, TBA, TN, and PBT, who inspired me to compose this piece as a point of reference for the people to be able to accessibly and readily retrieve it in real time. In advance, thank you for sharing and spreading this message far and wide. And thank you so much for all the amazing things you will do with this information going forward. It has been an honor to compose this message on your behalf. Feel free to reach out to me with any inquiries or objections you may have in regards to the evidence I've presented in this guide. All feedback is welcome. My email is tsp@thestormypoet.com and my business phone number is 817-382-1108. And this concludes the Code of Conduct Suggestion Guide for Surviving, Comprehending, and Fully Dismantling Systematic Racism/White Supremacy for the Descendants of Freedmen. Remember, it's not about a few doing a lot, it's about the few doing what they're able to, consistently. Peace, love, and reparations. One love and one justice, the Stormy Poet. This document is, of course, completely free, but if you feel the information presented has been of benefit to your life in any way, please feel free to make any sized contribution via Cash App at $The Stormy Poet, on Venmo at TSP Compositions, or PayPal at paypal.me/The Stormy Poet. Also, find my podcast on Linktree at TSP Podcast, my published work on Linktree at TSP Books, and my Patreon at patreon.com/PoEthnicJustice.